Game of Thrones, The Wrath of the Sleeping Dragon. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 701 Ice Dragon. This roar was filled with endless anger, resounding through the entire ice field like thunder. What? Benjen, who was in a daze and about to be tortured to death, shuddered, then woke up and looked up at the sky. Crash, and the silent army of the dead around him seemed to suddenly wake up at the same time. They all raised their heads and looked into the distance, as if they had received some kind of order. In the sky above their heads in the distance, covered by white snow, a huge ice dragon penetrated the snow and swooped down from the sky. Its body was burning with ice blue flames, and it kept roaring. It seemed that it was fighting with a mysterious existence. Its size was as huge as Balerion, whom Benjen saw in King's Landing, and even a little bigger. Then this huge ice dragon kept flapping its wings in the sky, mixed with strong winds and loud roars, and then fell from the sky. It wanted to extinguish the ice blue flame on its body, but it could never do it. At this moment, the army of corpses around Benjen suddenly let out a strange roar. It seemed that someone had given them an order again, and then the group of corpses besieged the ice dragon that fell from the sky to the ground. Roar, roar. The endless army of corpses rushed towards the injured ice dragon, and the giant dragon covered with frost kept roaring, and its light blue crystal eyes were full of anger. It is the undisputed absolute overlord of the entire cold world. They have no natural enemies, but today they encountered a difficult opponent. Then it looked at the endless little ants rushing towards it, and then opened its huge mouth. The surging cold dragon breath rushed in, directly freezing a group of corpses into powder. The group of corpses rushed up, and then encountered the blue dragon breath spewed by the ice dragon, as if blown away by the wind, and turned into ashes. The ice dragon roared continuously, trying to scare off the enemies with its dragon breath and roar. But the huge ice dragon miscalculated. The terrifying dragon breath did not scare off the group of unconscious dead people. They still rushed up fearlessly. Moreover, the strange ice blue flame was still burning on the ice dragon's body. This flame seemed to burn on its soul, making the ice dragon feel uncomfortable, but it couldn't get rid of it. It had just fallen from the sky and smashed a small pit and cracks on the ice surface, but it also broke one of its wings. It couldn't fly again in a short time, and Benjen was also carried into the army of corpse ghosts. There was no way to escape, and he was forced to keep rushing towards the direction of the ice dragon. Is this the legendary ice dragon? Benjen felt his scalp tingling when he saw this scene. It was really what he thought. He was just thinking about some things in the past on the lonely, boring, and crazy road, but he didn't expect to really see the legendary ice dragon. Of course, although its size was not as terrifying as the legend said, it was not much different. It was even bigger than Balerion, that he had seen in King's Landing. Moreover, its entire body was made of ice and snow, and its blue crystal eyes were full of wildness. Countless wights had already climbed onto its body, like ants. The ice dragon roared in pain, its body trembled and spasmed slightly, and its huge mouth full of ferocious fangs opened again, to spit out cold dragon breath, turning these mortal ants into dust. Oops. When Benjen saw this scene, he did not feel any joy, but only fear, because now he was being carried and forced to move forward continuously, and was about to be pushed to the side of the ice dragon. He had already seen the power of the other party's dragon breath. This terrifying power was as terrible as the fire dragon of the Targaryen family, because it did not give people a chance to breathe. As long as they were touched by a little bit of this bone-chilling coldness, they would be directly turned into ashes. The fire-breathing dragons of the Targaryen family gave people a chance to survive, such as cutting off the burning parts of the body, or jumping into the water. However, most people were still burned to death, or jumped into the water and drowned, or died of excessive blood loss after cutting off their hands and feet. It seemed that the ice dragon was much more merciful. At least they died without any pain. But Benjen had no time to care about these things at the moment, because he was about to be pushed into the attack range of the dragon. Damn it. However, the dragon was now affected by the ice blue flames, and it was greatly restrained. The flames seemed to affect its mind, and the serious injuries on the other side and the ants lying on its body also made it extremely painful, becoming a little listless. But countless whites continued to surge over, not only tired, but also fearless of death. Then the ice dragon roared in pain again, as if it was back to life. Roar, then it suddenly raised its ferocious head, and spewed dragon breath. The huge tail swung, and crushed a group of corpse ghosts into meat paste. The corpse ghost that had just climbed on it was also thrown away. Seeing that the situation was not good, Banyan quickly pulled his mount, and hid behind a huge rock. The dragon breath of the ice dragon then swept across the surroundings as far as his eyes could see. The place where he was just now was directly cleared out. The colleagues around Banyan also turned into ashes, and dissipated in the air. The huge rock behind Banyan seemed to be affected as well. It was covered with a layer of ice mist in an instant, and then it broke into pieces, and turned into fragments all over the ground. Old God bless you. Are you kidding? The stone was frozen and cracked. Banyan, who was hiding behind the stone, thought he had escaped by luck, but when he turned around and saw this scene, his pupils suddenly froze. However, the mad ice dragon was being attacked by the army of whites, so it naturally had no time to care about what a small ant was thinking. Its patience had long been worn out, and it was also exhausted. Its broken translucent wings trembled. At the last moment, it roared, opened its huge mouth full of sharp teeth, and prepared to spit out cold dragon breath again. At this moment, Benjen was under the huge head of the ice dragon, covered by the shadow, and within the range of the dragon's breath. At this moment, his only backer had been broken into pieces under the dragon's breath. He was a little at a loss, watching the ice dragon with a huge shadow above his head open its mouth, ready to spit out dragon breath again. It's over. Benjen sighed slightly, and stood there, and closed his eyes. He felt that he was dead. However, at this moment, a white walker wearing an ice crown, and holding an ancient stone sword had stepped on the top of the ice dragon's head at some point. Its figure was blurred, and then it raised the stone sword in its hand, and pierced it fiercely into the ice dragon's hard skull. Roar. The ice dragon suddenly let out a roar that was 10 times louder than the previous one, shaking the entire endless ice field. It was painful, desperate, and incredible, but this was also its last roar. Boom boom. Then its body seemed to have lost all its strength, and its head, which was held high, fell heavily to the ground, smashing another group of zombies into a pulp, and the snow on the ground flew. Chapter 2. Wait a minute, I will finish it after I wake up. I was too sleepy at noon yesterday at the office, so I ordered a cup of strong mocha coffee to take out to refresh myself. It is now 4:29 in the morning. Bukyu, mocha coffee, you are really good. Chapter 702. Assassination. Boom. The huge ice dragon let out a last desperate roar, then fell heavily on the ice field, stirring up the snow and fog that covered the sky. Benjen Stark was too close, and was also impacted. He was forced to loosen the red and yellow reins, and his hands were on the ground, drowned by the wind and snow, gasping for breath. It's a pity that he is now a dead man, and his heavy breathing caused air to leak everywhere. Benjen had been trying to make himself breathe again, unwilling to die like this, but later he gradually got used to the current situation, where he occasionally forgot to breathe for most of the day, but it was not a big deal, and finally chose to let it go. It's him. He is the Night King. Benjen lay on the ground waiting for the snowflakes raised by the ice dragon to fall, and the surroundings were full of white, but at the last moment he still saw that scene, the white walker standing on the top of the ice dragon. He wore an ice crown, and held an ancient stone sword. Benjen had met the Night King once. That was in Winterfell. He jumped off the wall to escape, and the Night King came riding a skeleton horse, but just glanced at them, and did not chase them in person. Therefore, Benjen and others escaped at that time. Otherwise, if the Night King put down his status and chased them in person, I'm afraid that the grass on their graves would be 3 feet high now. Not long ago, Benjen was caught in the army of the dead and focused on looking for 2 of them. One of them was his sister Lyanna Stark, and the other was the Night King, who he believed was the biggest boss of the invasion of the White Walkers. Only if he found the trace of the Night King would he be worthwhile. The reason he applied to Commander Mormont To go to the wall alone was to track the traces of the White Walkers and prepare for the next battle between the living and the dead. Commander Mormont also wanted to arrange for a few people to go out with Benjen, but he refused because Benjen knew that this trip would inevitably be dangerous. It's the Night King. Benjen had met the Night King once before, and with the strong stimulation at that time, he remembered the Night King's appearance very clearly. At the last moment of despair, he saw the Night King climb onto the top of the ice dragon, and then inserted his ancient and mysterious stone sword into the top of the ice dragon's head. Although Benjen's heart stopped beating when he thought of this, his soul gradually became excited, and even his breathing, like a broken bellows, became rapid. He grasped the dragon crystal dagger hidden in his chest with one hand. When he was still a human, he had no feeling when holding the dragon crystal dagger, but now he has become a dead man, and when he touches the dragon crystal, he will have an inexplicable sense of horror. This feeling is like a basin of cold water poured from head to toe, and he shuddered. So this dragon crystal dagger made him wake up instantly when he was confused. Benjen held the dragon crystal dagger hidden in his chest, and then took advantage of the white wind and snow around him that had not completely dissipated, and quickly hid the dagger in his sleeves. At this time, the old horse Red and Yellow, who had been separated from Banayan, also ran back. It penetrated the snow and wind, and the saddle made a sound. Half of its cheek was rotten and hideous, but its eyes were very gentle. It had just been frightened by the ice dragon and Banayan let go of his hand, so it ran away. Now it has found itself again. It didn't know what it looked like now, so it used its hideous head to slightly arch its master. Old friend. When Banayan saw Red and Yellow running back again, his heart softened slightly. He didn't care about the ugly and terrible appearance of the other party, and gently stroked its hair. Although this old horse has also become a skeleton horse, it seems to still maintain its sanity before death like Banayan, and follows its master closely. Banayan once guessed that all these changes might be related to the old fishbeam tree in White Tree Village. After all, it was there that he was ambushed by the whites, and fought to death, fell in front of the fishbeam tree, and when he opened his eyes again, he had become a white who maintained his sanity before death. However, Banayan had no time to verify the truth of his guess. Whether he could go back alive was still another matter. He could only attribute it to the blessing of the old gods of the north, because the fishbeam wood was the belief of most people north of the neck. Red and Yellow, you leave here first. Banayan gently stroked Red and Yellow's mane, felt the dragon crystal dagger hidden in his sleeve, and gradually strengthened his thoughts in his heart, and then spoke in a low voice. The eyes of this mixed breed warhorse with a messy coat clearly revealed a puzzled look. Of course, it didn't know what its master was saying, but the two had cooperated for many years, and it could read Banayan's gestures. Banayan patted the warhorse on the butt, which meant to tell it to leave. The mixed colored warhorse with half of its head rotted gently arched Banayan again, then turned around, and walked away reluctantly. But every few steps, it turned its head to look at Banayan, hoping to see its master change his mind and keep it. However, it only saw the blue and cold face of its master, and there was no wavering in its blue eyes. Soon, the skeleton horse, that had followed Benjen for many years, but was driven away by its master, disappeared in the snowstorm, and the snowstorm stirred up by the ice dragon's fall to the ground gradually subsided. At this moment, the huge ice dragon was lying quietly on the ground, still burning with the ice blue flame, as if it was dead, but no blood flowed from its body. The Night King stood in front of the ice dragon's body, with his hand slightly raised, and the same ice blue flame as the ice dragon's was burning in his palms. It was unknown what mysterious magic he was performing. The Night King stood in front of the ice dragon's body, with his back to all the whites behind him. He seemed to have great faith in his compatriots, and was not on guard at all. The Black Knight looked at the back of the Night King, and reaffirmed his belief again. He grasped the dagger hidden in his sleeve, and then quietly mixed in the group of whites and gradually approached the back of the Night King. Benjen may not be the most virtuous and honorable person, but at this moment he is willing to sacrifice himself to save more people. Ho! A drooling white beside him growled with a hideous face, as if greeting Benjen, but the Black Knight ignored him. In his eyes, there was only the back of the man with the ice crown on his head and the flames in his hands. He approached the back of the Night King step by step, and finally came to a distance of less than 10 steps behind the Night King, and the Night King seemed to still not notice. Go to hell. Then Benjen gritted his teeth slightly, and then the dragon crystal dagger hidden in his sleeve suddenly fell down, and held in his palm, and rushed towards the back of the Night King. Chapter 703 Lyanna. When Benjen was only a few steps away from the Night King, he suddenly pulled out the dragon crystal dagger that had been hidden from his sleeve and stabbed the Night King in the back. Go to hell. Benjen was determined to die. As long as he stabbed the Night King in the back and killed the leader of this monster, he would not hesitate to be crushed to pieces. However, at this critical moment, a slender pale hand suddenly stretched out, grabbed Benjen's wrist with a snap, and blocked him in front of him. On the other side, the Night King, who was standing in front of the ice dragon's body and performing some magic, seemed to sense something. He tilted his head slightly and looked behind. But he only saw a woman with skin as pale as the moon and grey-white long hair blocking a white, not letting the other party get close to him. The Night King's eyes burning with ice blue flames narrowed slightly. If you look closely, you can find that the ice blue flames burning in his eyes are exactly the same as those on his palm and the ice dragon's body. But the Night King didn't seem to notice anything unusual. He trusted this female White Walker very much. Without saying a word, he turned his head and looked at the body of the ice dragon again, continuing to cast his magic. On the other side, Benjen mustered up all his courage to take out the dragon crystal dagger hidden in his sleeve and stabbed the Night King in the back. In his eyes, there was only the Night King, the culprit who had brought chaos to the human world. He wanted to kill him at the cost of his life, so that there were no other people around him in his eyes. But Benjen didn't expect that a hand would suddenly grab his wrist when he was about to succeed. The 5 fingers of this hand were slender, pale, and cold to the bone. Benjen shuddered. Of course, he was not frozen by the other party's fingers. He could no longer feel the cold now, but was startled and suddenly woke up. He saw the Night King turned his head and looked over here. It was not until then that Benjen realized that he had unknowingly come to a place not far from the Night King. However, his assassination attempt failed. He was discovered by the White Walkers in advance and caught on the spot. I'm afraid that what awaits him next will be torn into pieces or even tortured. Despair rose in Benjen's heart, but when he looked up, he saw a very familiar face. It was a beautiful face, but her face was as pale as moonlight. She had the iconic long face of the Stark family, long grey hair, dark lips, and flames burning in her light blue eyes. She was looking at her brother with a sharp gaze. Lyanna. The Black Knight widened his eyes slightly and couldn't help but whispered. He never thought that the person who caught him was actually his sister Lyanna. But just as Benjen was about to say something, he was stopped by Lyanna's cold eyes. She grabbed Benjen's wrist with one hand, leaned close to him, and put the dragon crystal dagger in his palm back into his sleeve. On the other side, the white was not only noticed by Lyanna and the Night King himself, but also by other whites around, and the Kings of Winter. But like the Night King, they only saw that Lyanna stopped the lost white and did not find any other abnormalities, and then they retracted their gazes. The White Walkers controlled so many armies of the dead, and naturally there would be some omissions. This was not a rare thing. As long as they stopped them and gave orders again, they could do it. Lyanna Stark's eyes were burning with indifference, and her eyes were fixed on the lost white in front of her, but she did not say a word from beginning to end. She hoped that Benjen could understand what she meant, and Benjen nodded slightly. The two siblings grew up together and naturally had a tacit understanding. Then this woman with skin as pale as moonlight, light blue eyes, and a body as beautiful as ice let go of Benjen's palm. Cough. The surrounding White Walkers made a noisy sound, and Benjen also pretended to cough a few times, then staggered to the back. After a long while, the Night King's palm burned with an ice blue flame, and it seemed that the spell had finally ended. The eyes of the huge ice dragon corpse lying in front of him suddenly ignited flames. Roar. Then the ice dragon suddenly climbed up from the ground, raised its head and let out a deafening dragon roar. The sound spread far in the endless ice field, and a pair of translucent wings spread out, enough to cover the sky and the sun. The ice dragon suddenly came back to life, and even the injuries on its body seemed to have improved. It let out a dragon roar, and then its strong and powerful hind legs suddenly exerted force, spread its wings, and flew into the sky. The ice dragon flew straight into the sky into the white snow, and Benjen, who had just pretended to be stupid on the ground, looked up at the ice dragon that disappeared from his sight. If he was still a human, the thrilling moment just now might have been wet with cold sweat. However, Benjen is no longer a human, but the fear from the soul still rises. He knows that it was Lionel who saved him just now, otherwise he might not be able to succeed, even if he rushed over. Because the Night King was obviously not defenseless, Benjen had already noticed some disturbances when he took out the dragon crystal dagger and was about to take action. But Benjen's action was stopped in time by Lyanna Stark, who stood in front of Benjen, so that the Night King did not find any clues and did not think much. Because most of his attention was still on how to revive the magic of this ice dragon, Benjen escaped by luck. If his sister had not stopped him, he might have been torn to pieces by now. Therefore, while Benjen was glad that he was rescued by Lyanna, he still felt a little scared. This assassination attempt was purely impulsive and without thorough preparation, and it almost failed. However, although the assassination was not successful and even almost failed, Benjen was not without gain, because he met his sister Lyanna, whom he had always wanted to see. This was also one of the main purposes of Benjen coming to the wall instead of Eddard. Judging from the eye contact between the two siblings and the changes in the strength in their hands, Benjen was slightly excited in his heart, because this was in line with Eddard and his original speculation. His sister Lyanna was indeed resurrected and turned into a White Walker, but she did not seem to be controlled in her mind like himself, but still retained many memories of her previous life. She deliberately left many marks and hints, perhaps just to tell the Stark brothers that she was still alive, and asked them to come find her. Chapter 2. Wait a minute. Chapter 704. Black Necklace. Benjen. The Night King successfully tamed an ice dragon, and then he rode the ice dragon through the snow and wind and left here. And Benjen Stark also found his mount, red and yellow. He had driven away the other party not long ago, because he was determined to assassinate the Night King. But unfortunately, the assassination failed. The Night King was not unprepared. Benjen almost got caught. If it weren't for his sister Lyanna's sudden intervention, perhaps Benjen would have been killed now. And this loyal old horse also didn't go far. When Benjen found it, it was still wandering not far from the army of dead people, as if it was still waiting for its master to change his mind. When Red and Yellow saw Benjen again, he excitedly stepped out horse hoof prints on the snow, trotted to his side, and arched his ugly and ferocious head slightly to his master. Sorry. And Benjen also gently touched Red and Yellow's mane to apologize to the old friend who had just been driven away. But at this moment, a woman's cold and hoarse voice came from behind him. Lyanna Stark, who had stopped Benjen and saved his life not long ago, appeared in the snow. The woman's face was cold, her skin was as pale as the moonlight, and there was a slight flicker of fire in her blue eyes. She still wore the metal emblem of the Dire Wolf on her chest. Lyanna was still the same as before. The blood of the running wolf flowed in her body. Except for being too pale, her face was still the same as before, at least better than her appearance after death. Lyanna died of dystocia in the Tower of Joy. The climate in Dawn was hot. Her brother Eddard carried her sister's body out of Dawn, and then escorted the body all the way back to Winterfell. By the time of burial, her body had already rotted to the point of being unrecognizable, and even a large amount of seafood abalone was needed to suppress the stench. However, after she and the successive kings of winter were resurrected by the Night King, her withered bones grew a body made of ice crystals again, so she returned to her appearance before death. Including her father and brother Rickard Stark and Brandon, they all returned to their previous appearances, but Lyanna had communicated with them, and except for herself, they seemed to have no consciousness of their own, but were completely controlled by the Night King. Since then, Lyanna has been cautious in her words and deeds, and has never exposed her secrets. She left many marks hoping that her brother Eddard and her younger brother Benjen would notice them. The Stark brothers did not disappoint Lyanna's expectations. Eddard noticed the clues left by Lyanna, and believed that she still maintained her sanity before her death. Then Benjen volunteered to go out, to find his sister Lyanna on behalf of Eddard. After all, Ed had already had his own family and children, and was the pillar of the Stark family while he was still alone. As a result, hard work paid off, and Benjen still found his sister at the last minute. Because Benjen went out to look for Ed and Yellow, and Lyanna waited cautiously until the Night King left on the ice dragon before finding him, so at this moment the two were far away from the army of the dead, and the surrounding wind and snow were so strong that no one could see them. Lyanna, Benjen. After a long separation, the two siblings, who were once separated by life and death, hugged each other tightly. However, now that both of them have become dead, there is no longer any estrangement between them. After a long separation, there are naturally many things to say. Benjen told what happened after he left the Great Wall and went north alone, including being ambushed and killed in the White Tree Village, then opening his eyes and becoming a white, and then following a White Walker all the way to an ice altar, and finally fighting an ice dragon and almost turning into ashes, but once again escaping danger and meeting Lyanna. Lyanna told what happened after she revived. The Night King came to the crypt of Winterfell and revived the kings of winter in the past, including some members of the Stark family in modern times, which seems to be related to the strength of bloodline. Some of the kings of winter in the past have not revived, and Lyanna is not a very important member of the Stark family, but she also woke up, so she guessed that there might be some screening conditions. Lyanna Stark had all her memories of her life from the moment she opened her eyes. Then the tomb of Winterfell collapsed, and she followed all her ancestors out of the cellar. Father and elder brother have no memories of their lives. When Benjen heard his sister's words, his face suddenly showed disappointment. Although he and Ed had guessed that Lyanna had memories, they also imagined that their father and elder brother Brandon were also in this situation. But Lyanna, who was in contact with them all day, obviously had more say. The little wolf girl Lyanna has been smart since she was a child, so her memory was restored, but she was keenly aware that the people around her were in a state of confusion, so she did not expose it, but quietly went to her father and elder brother to test. But unfortunately, the test did not have any results. Father Rickard and elder brother Brandon did not respond at all, just like other revived Stark ancestors. That's right. Lyanna nodded calmly. It was obvious that she had been living alone with the army of White Walkers for several years, with no one to communicate with, and facing the dead every day. She was able to not go crazy, which was considered an excellent psychological endurance, so she had already accepted the fact that her father and elder brother were White Walkers. But, Lyanna, why can you recover your memory? Benjen felt a little disappointed, but then he grasped the key point and asked. Others had no memories of their lives, only Lyanna had them, which proved that there must be something different about her sister, and maybe this could be the answer to the problem. I rely on this. Hearing her brother's question, Lyanna did not hide it at all, and what she wanted to say next was exactly this. Then the woman undressed, took off a black necklace hidden under her clothes from her neck, and handed it to Benjen. The necklace looked black, and had no color. There was only a metal chain, and the pendant was an irregularly shaped black oily stone. This necklace doesn't look like it would be suitable for a beauty like Lyanna Stark, and even a peasant's daughter might not be interested in it. This is a gift from Rhaegar to me. Chapter 705 Questioning. However, Lyanna Stark, the daughter of the Duke of the North at that time, had always worn this ugly black necklace around her neck. This was given to me by Rhaegar, Lyanna said calmly. After coming back to life, she did not choose to hide her love affair with Rhaegar. After several years of being in the army of the dead, Lyanna's change was greater than ordinary people could imagine. Living in an environment full of evil spirits and zombies for several consecutive years without going crazy was something that ordinary people could not do. If it were someone else, they might have gone crazy long ago. However, what Lyanna did not know was that her love affair with Rhaegar had long been exposed, and Rhaegar's notoriety of kidnapping and raping her had long been cleared. Prince Rhaegar? When Benjen heard his sister's words, he reached out and took the black necklace and was silent for a moment. After meeting Lyanna in person and hearing her story, Benjen finally believed that his sister had eloped with Rhaegar, that Rhaegar and Lyanna were in love, and that Rhaegar had not kidnapped her. The war that broke out was a wrong war, and his father and brother went to King's Landing to ask for an explanation, and died in vain. His father Rick had asked for a trial by combat, but the Mad King used fire as a proxy knight, so his father was burned to death in armor, leaving only a charred corpse, and his brother was strangled to death by a special torture device when he wanted to free his father. Lyanna, why didn't you explain it clearly at the beginning? Why? Benjen looked at his sister with the black necklace in his hand, and then couldn't help but ask. At the beginning, his father and brother thought that Lyanna was kidnapped by Prince Riga, so they went to King's Landing to ask for an explanation. However, in the process, neither Lyanna nor Prince Riga, the two parties involved, stood up, but simply disappeared. It was the irresponsible behavior of these two people for love that led to the division and turmoil of the country. The wolf, deer, Fish and Eagle Alliance fought against the Iron Throne, and the Iron Throne also gathered the Tyrell family and Dawn to fight against the rebels. If Lyanna and Prince Riga had come out to clarify this matter, perhaps the series of events that followed would not have happened, and his father and brother would not have died in vain. His father was such an ambitious person. He was determined to go south, and arranged marriages with the Tully family and the Baratheon family. If his son-in-law could be replaced by the prince of the current dynasty and the king of the next generation, Benjen believed that his father would never refuse. In the face of her brother's questioning, Lyanna fell silent, and regret rarely appeared on her pale cheeks. This matter has always been a knot in her heart that is difficult to untie. How is he? Lyanna was silent for a long time, and then asked in a hoarse voice. Who? Benjen saw that Lyanna's resentment accumulated for so many years in silence was suddenly released. He took a deep breath and asked back. My son. Lyanna answered without hesitation. How is he now? What's his name now? Long before Lyanna gave birth to the baby boy, she had already known that her husband Riga had died on the battlefield, so her only concern after her resurrection was their child, her and Riga's child. She had entrusted the child to her brother Eddard, and asked Eddard to take good care of him. However, Lyanna also knew that her child must not be called Targaryen, but had to change his name, otherwise he would definitely be killed by Robert. Your son? When Benjen heard Lyanna's words, his mind was full of question marks. At the public trial, it was confirmed that Riga did not rape Lyanna, but never mentioned that they had a son. However, Benjen was also a smart man. After hearing Lyanna's words, he only thought about it for a while and thought of something. When Eddard returned from the south with your body, he also brought back a baby boy, claiming that it was his illegitimate son. Benjen opened his eyes and said in disbelief. Eddard had never mentioned this to him. This was a secret that had rotted in his heart. The only time he talked about this with others was during the Battle of Winterfell, when Eddard told his wife Catelyn about the life of his illegitimate son. Because Eddard wanted to live, and I with Winterfell at that time, he wanted to tell this secret to his wife before he died to untie her knot. On the other hand, he also hoped to tell Jon when the opportunity was right in the future. Jon Snow. This is the name of Eddard's illegitimate child. Benjen looked Lyanna up and down. If he hadn't mentioned it, he would never have noticed it. However, after this, he immediately found that Lyanna and his brother's illegitimate child looked very similar. Don't worry, Lyanna. He is in King's Landing now, being raised by our sister-in-law, Lady Catelyn. Jon is doing well. He is now tall and strong, and he has a high talent for horsemanship and swordsmanship. He has been learning swordsmanship from me since he learned to walk. Rob's swordsmanship is no match for Jon. Benjen has a good relationship with his nephews. He taught Rob, Theon and Jon swordsmanship, so he is very familiar with the level of several teenagers. Jon is the best, followed by Rob, and finally Theon. Jon Snow. Hearing that her son is doing well now, Lyanna felt relieved. She knew very little about the human world while staying in the north. Not to mention that her son is only in his teens now, so it is normal that he is not well known. Then Lyanna looked at the necklace in Benjen's hand and spoke. Let's continue what we just said. Riga gave me this necklace. He claimed that he dreamed about something about the future and told me that dragons have 3 heads. Dragons have 3 heads. Benjen asked back with a little confusion, but Lyanna ignored him and continued. And Riga then told me that this necklace is made of a very precious material, which may play a vital role in the future. At the same time, it also helped me preserve my memories before my death, allowing me to remain awake. after I was revived. Chapter 706 Oily Blackstone. Is that so? When Benjamin heard Lyanna's words, he couldn't help but look down at the unremarkable blackstone necklace in his hand. But I can't see anything. In Benjamin's eyes, this was just an ordinary stone necklace, but the surface of the other side was slightly oily, which seemed to absorb the light. He tried to adjust the angle. The aurora in the northern sky was gorgeous, but any light shining on it would be absorbed completely. The blackstone seemed to become purer and darker after absorbing the light, as if facing an abyss. Benjamin looked directly at this small blackstone at a close distance and couldn't help but feel an uncomfortable dizziness in his heart. Logically speaking, his body was already a corpse. He was dead, but he could still control his activities, but he had long been unable to sense cold or heat. However, when he looked directly at this small black stone, he couldn't help but feel uncomfortable and wanted to vomit. Therefore, this was a kind of discomfort that directly affected Benjamin's soul, so that he couldn't escape, even if he became a dead man. This feeling, so familiar. Benjamin resisted the dizziness and nausea in his brain, and then suddenly took the small black stone away from his eyes. Then he gasped and knelt on one knee on the ground, as if his soul had been taken away, and he became weak. Don't look directly at this stone for a long time, Benjamin, because it will swallow up your gaze. And Lyanna's voice rang at this time. She didn't stop Benjamin just now and let her little brother suffer, because she had suffered this loss before, but it was not dangerous. Therefore, Lyanna didn't speak to remind him just now, so that Benjamin would suffer a loss and better understand the magic of this small stone. I know what this feeling is, Lyanna. I've seen it. However, kneeling on one knee, his broken lungs kept pulling like a broken bellows. Benjamin held the black stone necklace in his hand, and then raised his head and spoke. Lyanna was slightly stunned when she heard Benjamin's words. She didn't expect that Benjamin had seen such a mysterious and scary little thing. Yes, I remember. I've seen it. Benjamin remembered where he felt this familiar feeling. Not long ago, he followed the White Walker all the way north and finally came to an ice altar. However, the White Walker seemed to be escorting something important. It turned over and dismounted, and then walked towards the ice altar step by step. Benjamin was tempted to stop the other party at that time. He instinctively thought that the other party must be preparing to do something important. For the White Walkers, the key thing must be disadvantageous to humans. But unfortunately, Benjamin did not make up his mind at that time. In the end, he let the other party come to the ice altar, and then took out a black stone that was much larger than this one from a package, and placed it on the ice altar. Then the black stone placed on the huge ice altar began to burn with an ice blue flame. Benjamin was also looking at him at that time, and then he felt dizzy, and finally lost his mind, becoming a confused white, until they were far away from the range of the flame. Is that so? Lyanna heard about her brother's experience, and then showed a thoughtful expression. She was not near the altar at that time, so she did not witness this scene, but as a senior spy, who had penetrated into the White Walkers, she obviously knew more about Blackstone than that. This oily Blackstone is different from the Blackstone buildings forged by the Valyrian Dragon King. That kind of Blackstone is dry, and forged by fire and magic. There are several Blackstone buildings built by the Valyrian Dragon King on the continent of Westeros. The castle on Dragonstone Island is built of Blackstone, and the towering tower base of the Hightower family in Old Town is also made of Blackstone. But although they are similar to the Blackstone necklace that Rhaegar gave to Lyanna, they are not made of the same material. I don't know what its specific function is, and I don't know if they are distributed in other parts of the world. But there is no doubt that it is very important to the Night King. Lyanna said thoughtfully, and then asked again. Benjamin, do you know why we suddenly wanted to attack the Iron Islands? Huh? Benjamin was slightly stunned, and then nodded. Although he was trapped in the cellar of Winterfell at that time, he heard about it after escaping. The White Walkers bypassed the main battlefield of the Neck, attacked the Iron Islands, and suddenly appeared behind the coalition forces, which directly led to the coalition forces being attacked from all sides and almost annihilated. If it weren't for His Majesty riding a dragon to repel the Night King in the battle, perhaps after that battle, the Long Night would cover the entire Westeros and completely lose all hope. because at that time, the main force of the human coalition forces in the entire Westeros gathered here. If the Battle of the Green Fork was lost, it would almost mean that humans had lost the ability to resist the White Walkers and could only wait to die, to cut off the retreat and attack the coalition from behind. Benjen Stark said, but Lyanna shook her head and denied his answer. No, he doesn't really value the human coalition. He just wants us to find something on the Iron Islands. Lyanna was among the White Walkers who led the army of the dead to attack the Iron Islands. Victarion had also seen her, so she naturally knew why the White Walkers attacked the Iron Islands. The he that Lyanna mentioned was the Night King, and the name for the Night King among the White Walkers did not seem to be the Night King. But Lyanna spoke very obscurely, and even when she mentioned he, she couldn't help but lower her voice a little, as if she was afraid that the other party could hear it. Looking for something? What? And this answer was completely beyond Benjen's expectations, and his brows were slightly frowned. He didn't expect that the White Walkers attacked the Iron Islands to find something. What was it that was so worthy of the Night King's obsession? Then his eyes fell on the black stone necklace, and his heart moved slightly. Could it be this? It's this oily black stone. Lyanna did not keep him in suspense, but spoke directly. He asked us to find this oily black stone that can absorb all light. He seemed to be able to sense that there was such a stone on the Iron Islands. And we found this oily black stone in the castle of the Greyjoy family after landing on Pike Island. It is the Sea Stone throne that the Ironborn call the symbol of the Iron King. Chapter 707 Sea Monster. Your Majesty, this is some important news from the East Continent recently. King's Landing, Red Keep, Royal Council Hall. Compared to the turbulent situation in the Endless Ice Field, the human world is still generally peaceful, and some areas are in war. Intelligence Minister Varys submitted a piece of intelligence to the Royal Council, which contained some important intelligence about foreign countries that his little bird had recently collected. The world of the trading city-states is not peaceful. The merchant ships of Loras and the fishing boats of the Ibonese seem to have been attacked by sea monsters on the vast trembling sea. Some of the broken ship fragments and cargo have recently drifted to the coast of Bravos along the sea current. The bite marks on them are shocking, and no survivors have been found. The bald eunuch's voice was soft and delicate, and he was talking freely, while Tyrion, the Emperor's personal advisor, stroked his beard and teased. I've heard about this recently, and it seems to be a big deal among sailors. Bravos is the city closest to the north on the west coast of Essos. Recently, many shipwrecks have been found floating on the Sea of Bravos. It is said that several fleets from Ibon, Loras and Bravos disappeared on the sea, and people speculate that the wreckage of these ships is left by these fleets. People cannot guess what they encountered, but according to legend, the wreckage of the ship has shocking scars, which are suspected to be bitten by some monster. Therefore, sailors who travel to and from the Narrow Sea recently have been rumored to have been attacked by sea monsters, and they are even suspicious. However, as Tyrion is not very firm in his belief in ghosts and gods, he does not believe the rumors that there are sea monsters in the sea. I don't think it's as mysterious as they say. Maybe it's caused by the storm. The Emperor's personal advisor shrugged his shoulders slightly while sitting in a chair and said, perhaps, Lord Tyrion. But this still cannot explain those horrible bite marks. But we have nothing to worry about. Even if there is a sea monster, we still have His Majesty to rely on. The bold eunuch on the other side did not argue with Tyrion. He crossed his hands in his sleeves, and then secretly glanced at Viserys, who was sitting in the first seat. Seeing that the other party had no expression on his face, he continued to speak. Another inexplicable forest fire broke out in Norvus recently. It has cost a lot of money, but still cannot be extinguished. The bearded monks believe that it was the believers of the Red God who secretly made trouble and cast witchcraft to ignite the forest fire. Therefore, all the believers of the Red God in the territory are being expelled and slaughtered, and they are declared unwelcome. It is natural for a forest fire to burn in the Norvus Mountains, because the air there is dry, and it is located in a mountainous terrain, which is very easy to cause a fire. Almost every few years, you can hear about the Norvus forest fire accident. Sitting beside the Emperor, the new Prime Minister, the Governor of the West, Mistoyne, turned his head slightly and glanced at the Minister of Agriculture, Alistair Florent, and the two exchanged glances. Mistoin was born as a mercenary leader. He was good at commanding wars, but he was not very sensitive to politics. Therefore, he did his homework before he received the appointment and set off to King's Landing. He thought that, although he had ascended to a position above everyone else, he had no friends in the court of King's Landing and might not be able to show his talents. At this time, Alistair Florent, the leader of the lawful nobles, took the initiative to extend an olive branch to the new Prime Minister. In fact, as a representative of all the old nobles, the power behind the Florent family is still very large. Behind him stood the Tyrrell family, the former feudal lord of the Florent family, and many vassals during the Robert Baratheon period. They were not the heroes who followed Viserys to conquer the world, but the survivors of the old era. Therefore, they are now huddled together to survive, hoping to have a place in the political situation of the new empire. The Tyrrell family should have been their big brother, because most of the other duke families had already changed, and even if they were stripped of Highgarden and rushed to Star Shuttle City to become earls, the Tyrrell family still had a deep foundation. However, the Florent family, who had never been very convinced by the Highgarden steward in history, took the initiative to stand up and carry the banner at this time. The cunning Queen of Thorns naturally took a step back and handed over the position of big brother to Alistair Florent. After all, the other party now has a position as Minister of Agriculture and is qualified to attend the Royal Council. He is the most capable of speaking among these old nobles. Therefore, facing the olive branch that Alistair Florent took the initiative to extend, the ugly former mercenary leader hesitated for a moment and accepted it. In this way, at least he is not completely isolated and helpless in King's Landing. At this moment, his eyes looked at Alistair, and the old man of the Florent family, who was sensitive to politics, naturally understood, and then reminded him, "Your Majesty and all the lords, the Norvus wildfire occurs almost every year, big or small. Although the scale of this year's wildfire is not small, it is far from threatening Norvus. I'm afraid there is a reason why the bearded monk turned against the Red God cult at this time." After hearing the reminder from the old man of the Florent family, Mistoin suddenly realized. Then he frowned slightly, as if he thought of something, and spoke in a serious tone. Perhaps the old monk on the sinner's ladder predicted something again. Almost everything he predicted has happened. Then Mistoin turned his head and looked at the Minister of Intelligence, Varys. "Lord Varys, this matter deserves our attention." Mistoin used to be the leader of the Golden Group and mixed in the major city-states on the Essos continent, so he knew the internal affairs of each city-state like the back of his hand. There is a huge stone staircase in the city of Norvus called the Stairs of Sinners. It leads directly from the city to a temple on a cliff, which is the religious center of the entire Norvus monks. According to legend, an old monk from Norvus who has lived for who knows how many years lives in this ancient temple. His practice is extremely advanced, and he can see certain things that will happen in the future. He has helped Norvus escape disasters many times. When the people in the Imperial Council Hall heard the words of the new king's hand, they immediately whispered. The bold eunuch had a calm expression. As the Minister of Intelligence of the Empire, he naturally knew that what Mistoin said was right. There is indeed an old monk who should have lived in the legend on the Stairs of Sinners in Norvus. I understand, Lord Mistoin. Next, I will send my little bad to pay close attention to the movements of Norvus. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 708, Failure of the Eastward Advance. The next two things are the last. Intelligence Minister Varys said. Civil war broke out in the Kingdom of the Three Daughters, and the Dothrakar's eastward advance seems to have failed. The Three Daughters' kingdoms of Lies, Mia, and Tirosh seemed to have long-standing grievances. The Imperial fleet visited the three trading city-states one after another, and then ignited the war between them. Now Tirosh has declared war on Lies and Mia. The Tirosh Lord clamored to destroy me once again, and turn it into a scorched earth, and hang all the governors of Lies from trees. The two sides confronted each other in the waters near the Stepstone Islands, and then several fierce battles broke out. On the sea, the Tirosh fleet dealt a heavy blow to the Lies, and on land, the two sides fought simultaneously on the Stepstone Islands and the disputed lands. The Tirosh lord hired a number of elite mercenary groups and once seized a lot of land in the disputed lands, but was eventually counterattacked by the coalition forces of Mir and Lies. The battle between the two sides fell into a tense state, but generally speaking, the Tiroshes had the upper hand. The noble and elegant Lisses who were addicted to pleasure were beaten to a pulp. The Lisses were not good at fighting, and were even worse than the Tiroshes, who were in a state of disrepair. The reinforcement from me became a real help. Their arrival saved the situation on the battlefield. The battle-hardened narrow sea pirates were fearless and directly rammed the Tiroshi fleet into pieces. Then they launched a fierce boarding battle, and stopped the Tiroshi fleet from advancing further on the sea. On land, 2,000 mercenaries from the Cat's Order, friends of Saladin, arrived in time, and also saved the battle. Otherwise, the Lisses would probably have been flattened by the Tiroshi mercenary group. After several fierce battles, the Lisses governors who were supervising the battle in the front were scared to death. They fled back to the base camp in the rear and said that they would not supervise the battle in person. At the same time, they also clung to the thigh of the pirate governor, giving him and Humphrey Hightower a high command in the coalition of Mir and Lies, and ordered them to jointly command the army to stop the attack of the Tiroshi. And the brother-in-law of the young governor Humphrey Hightower, Governor Trigomaran, followed the other governors of Lies and hid in the base camp behind, secretly monitoring the other governors of Lies. As for another piece of news, the Dothraki who began to move eastward a few years ago did not know what kind of battle they encountered. Now some of the KLS began to reappear near these Dothraki. They seemed to have encountered an extremely powerful country blocking their way eastward. The Dothraki invaded this country and a tragic war broke out between the two sides. In the end, the Dothraki suffered a heavy defeat, suffered heavy casualties, and were forced to retreat back to the west of the Skeleton Mountains, licked their wounds, and returned to their homeland. The civil war in the Three Sisters is good news for us. We can continue to expand our influence in the East Continent, and even directly swallow up these three trading cities along with the disputed land, or accept them as our vassals. Justice Minister Oberyn sat on the chair with his fingers intertwined, and then spoke. The Dornishman made no secret of his ambition for land. In his opinion, the more land conquered, the better, and the stronger the country will be. However, as soon as he finished speaking, the Minister of Finance Illyrio Mopatis of Pentis immediately objected. Your Majesty, and Lord Oberyn, we are now in a critical period of economic reform. It is not appropriate to launch a war against foreign countries, otherwise it will easily destroy our fragile economic system. Now Illyrio's biggest concern is to stabilize the prices of King's Landing, and even the whole country. The empire has spread out a lot, but it is limited by the backward information technology of this era, and many messages are transmitted very slowly, so it should be developed more steadily. Otherwise, if there is any problem in the economic system, it will be a disaster for the entire market. For example, before the second battle of the Green Fork, the decisive battle between humans and the White Walkers, the prices in King's Landing had reached an outrageous level. Because a large amount of supplies and manpower were used to fill the front line, there was a shortage of supplies and manpower in the rear, and the currency depreciated to the point where it was impossible to buy anything. 6 copper coins bought a pumpkin, a silver deer exchanged for a pile of corn, and a gold dragon was worth a knife of beef or 6 skinny piglets. The price was simply outrageous. Second, Your Majesty, if we can make the Three Sisters Kingdom surrender without spending a single soldier, that would be okay. The little devil Tyrion Lannister held the long table of the Royal Council and then teased, but Tyrion was just teasing, because it was impossible to think about it. The handsome silver-haired young man sitting on the throne in the middle nodded slightly, and said without comment, "We have more important enemies waiting for us now." He did not express his specific views on the civil war in the Three Sisters Kingdom, and the other ministers in the royal court looked at each other slightly, then kept silent, and stopped discussing this topic. As for the Dothraki, the bold eunuch coughed lightly, and changed the subject. This group of barbarians returned to the Great Grass Sea after suffering a bloody defeat in the east. I'm afraid it's not good news for all of us. They may vent all the losses they suffered in the east, After all, the Dothraki are the notorious destroyers of civilization. What they are best at is massacre and destruction. It is quite gloating that they can suffer a bloody defeat in the east. But until now, no one knows why the Dothraki, who never expanded to the east, suddenly became obsessed with going east. Why did they take great risks to cross the Skeleton Mountains? The Dothraki have become different since they were unified by the mysterious Mengokal. The fierce battles on the Dothraki Sea once dyed the grasslands red, and after the unification of the Dothraki, the entire trading city-state, Lazarin and even Karth in the Slave Bay fell into trembling. But they did not go west to conquer these city-states, but turned around and headed east. By the way, Your Majesty, at this moment, Varys suddenly thought of something and spoke. In the intelligence I collected, some people claimed that the mysterious Mengokal trusted the Eastern Shadowbinders very much because they witnessed 3 people wearing red lacquer masks in V's Dothrak, often entering and leaving Mengokal's tent. Chapter 709, Building the Ancestral Hall. Your Majesty, Your Majesty. The routine royal council ended, and the ministers stood up and left, and Viserys returned to his bedroom. Jon Connington died unexpectedly in Dawn. In addition to the replacement of the position of Prime Minister, the position of Governor of Stormland was also vacant. The position of Governor is not hereditary, but the most capable one, and it is also not fixed to a certain family. Viserys can appoint someone as the Governor of Stormland, and it can also be elected by the nobles of Stormland. After Jon's death, only an unborn child was left, and it was not even possible to tell whether it was a boy or a girl. Even if Viserys was considerate, he could not appoint the child in Lady Bess's belly as the next governor of Stormland. That would be a serious destruction of the system he established with his own hands. From then on, no one took the governor's decree of the empire seriously. Therefore, Viserys did not appoint or parachute a governor to Stormland, but let the nobles of Stormland elect a governor by themselves and have him approved by the Iron Throne. Jon Connington's wife, Lady Bess Bracken, was pregnant and about to give birth, so Viserys asked her to stay in the Red Keep temporarily, vacating the position of the Prime Minister's tower and handing it over to the new Prime Minister, Miles Toyne. The pregnant Lady Bess Bracken was temporarily taken care of by the court steward in the Red Keep, waiting for the birth of the child, before returning to Storm's End, which is now managed by the steward of the Clinton family. At the same time, Viserys also asked Lady Bess to send a letter to the steward of the Clinton family, asking him to build a shrine for Jon Connington in Storm's End. This order made the steward and the maester of Storm's End, who received the letter, look at each other in confusion. Because the sanctuary in the castle is generally built to worship the 7 gods, and there are also shrines built to worship ancestors, but it is indeed not very common to worship a person who has just died. Even the steward and the maester who stayed at Storm's End felt a little creepy, with a cold wind behind their necks. They always felt that the soul of Lord Jon Connington seemed to be watching them from a corner. Of course, although they were a little creepy and incomprehensible, they had no choice. After all, this was an order from Lady Bess, and they could only do it. Therefore, a large-scale construction is now underway in Storm's End, and a shrine is being built to enshrine the statue of Jon Connington. And Viserys actually had a reason for doing this. He lent Jon Connington a little divine fire to help him grow quickly, and then prepared other things for Jon. He planned to place Jon Connington's soul in the shrine of the Clinton family in Storm's End in the future, so that he would become the guardian spirit of the Clinton family in Storm's End, survive with the incense of future generations, and also protect his future generations. After the royal meeting, Viserys returned to his bedroom to rest, while on the other side, the sound of clinking weapons colliding came from the garden of the Red Castle. At this moment, in the empty garden, the sun was shining brightly overhead, and 2 girls of similar height were fighting with magic weapons in their hands. One of them wore the white armor of the King's Guard, while the other girl wore silver armor, with a ruby inlaid on the necklace on her chest, and her long brown hair was scattered on the cold armor. Neither of them wore helmets, their figures moved swiftly, and the weapons in their hands kept colliding. The weapons they held were extremely luxurious, and if the knights outside saw them, they would probably be jealous and crazy. Because one of the 2 female knights held the Dragon Slayer sword, and the other held the famous Dark Sister, and both magic weapons were Valyrian steel swords. However, the red-haired female knight in a snow-white cloak finally had some advantages. Her swordsmanship was more weird, and her figure was more erratic, while the girl with long brown hair on the other side had the most orthodox swordsmanship, which was upright and strict. After 3 or 4 rounds, the female knight in white finally seized the opportunity to knock down the long sword in the opponent's hand, and pointed the tip of the sword at the opponent's throat. Then she sheathed the sword and asked curiously, "Your Highness, have you been worried recently?" "Sorry, Master Maya." When Rinus heard that a swordsmanship teacher saw through her disguise at a glance, she immediately looked a little ashamed. "It's no big deal, I'm also an experienced person." Maya is older than Rinus, and even older than Viserys. She used to hang out on the streets of Atlantis, and chose to become a mercenary in order to survive. She has experienced many life and death moments, and naturally has rich experience. Then Master Maya, what are the ruins of Illyria like? I'm a little curious. Rinus and Maya each sheathed their swords, took off their armor while walking, and Rinus was silent for a moment, and then couldn't help asking. I asked Viserys, but he didn't say anything. When the red-haired female knight heard Rinus's question, she immediately turned around and looked at her strangely. Then she understood what she meant and couldn't help but shook her head and chuckled. "There are some terrifying monsters in there, Your Highness. You won't be interested." The two girls talked as they walked, and then her topic changed very abruptly. "I once liked someone, Your Highness." "Really? Who did Master Maya like?" However, Maya's abrupt change of topic did not sound strange to Rinus. The red-haired female knight's words seemed to have touched her inner strangeness, so Rinus couldn't help but ask curiously. "A boy next door." The two girls walked into the corridor of the Red Castle garden. The green vines above their heads climbed up the racks, and the bright sunlight penetrated the branches and leaves, leaving mottled shadows. "He also has red hair, he is handsome, and most importantly, he sings very well. He often sang for me back then." Maya said this, and couldn't help but smile, but soon realized this, and quickly restrained her expression. "Really? What happened next?" Rinus didn't see the fleeting smile on Maya's face, and asked expectantly. "Later? Later he died." The red-haired female knight shrugged her shoulders and said, "Ah." This strong reversal immediately made Rinus a little unacceptable. So this story tells us that, if you like someone, you should fight for him as soon as possible, instead of dragging it out until the end and leaving regrets. Chapter 710, Mythical Battle. A few days later, King's Landing. In order to test something, Viserys once again came to the cellar under the Red Keep. Once, Rhaenys led the Golden Group to break through King's Landing, and then after occupying the Red Keep, the dragon bones in the cellar of the Red Keep were moved to the ground. After Viserys came to King's Landing, these dragon bones were put back in the cellar, because seeing these bones every day had some impact on his mood. However, at this moment, Viserys sat in the center surrounded by dragon bones. In front of him was a statue of a faceless goddess and a giant white raven skull. Merixes and John Connington were on his left and right. Viserys wanted to solve the secret of this raven skull a long time ago, but he never had the opportunity to do it. Until recently, he had a lot of free time and his own state had reached the best, so he dared to try to solve the secret of this raven skull. "Have you thought it through, Viserys?" Merix's voice was solemn, and on the other side, John Connington's soul was floating not far away, also showing a worried expression. He got the help of Viserys' divine fire. Basically, as long as Viserys' fire is not extinguished, he will never disappear. John Connington could not sense the existence of divinity before, but that was because his level was too low. Now he got the help of Viserys, and could sense the terrifying power hidden in this raven skull. Is it really the skull of the God of Storms? The God of Storms is an ancient raven? But unfortunately, no one could answer his question, because none of the people present were real gods. Merixes was the closest, but he was just a divine thought. Compared with the two people who were facing a great enemy, Viserys was relatively calm. The power contained in this raven skull was very strong, and Viserys had great expectations for it. What exactly could it be? Then the fire of faith between Viserys' eyebrows burned, and he pressed his palm on the white raven skull. In an instant, the golden light illuminated the entire underground world of the Red Castle, which made Renus, who had just walked into the cellar, stop in her tracks. The brown-haired girl widened her eyes and looked at the gorgeous scene in front of her in disbelief, even forgetting to breathe. On the other side, Viserys had been immersed in the world of the White Crow Skull and naturally had no time to care about the outside world. At this moment, a sky covered with dark clouds appeared in front of him, and under his feet was a sea with huge waves, and he seemed to be in midair, overlooking everything in front of him. The wind was roaring, the waves were roaring, and the lightning was densely covered in the sky like branches, and a rainstorm was pouring down. Where is this? Viserys stood in midair, raised his head, and looked at the dark and depressing sky, lowered his head, and overlooked the angry sea, but he seemed very calm, and not very panicked. Because he had inherited the power of the old gods, he was accustomed to this state. He knew that everything he saw in front of him at this moment was just a residual image of what had happened before, not a story happening in reality. He lowered his head and did not see his palm and body because he was just a passerby in this memory. In fact, there was no bystander here when this happened. At this moment, a sharp hissing sound penetrated the heavy dark clouds, as if suppressing the muffled thunder rolling overhead. A group of black crows broke through the dark clouds and swooped down towards the turbulent waves. It's this crow. Viserys saw at a glance that there was a crow in the group that was obviously much larger than the others. Its eyes flashed with anger, and its wings spread out like sharp blades. Its black body was wrapped in thunder, and it opened its sharp beak and let out a sharp roar. It's angry. Who is it fighting with? Viserys stood in the void. There was no trace of him in this area. He was just a passerby in this history. A thoughtful expression appeared on his face, and then his eyes turned to the sea. The storm god is the eternal enemy of the drowned god. He lives in a hall in the clouds, and the raven is his servant. He sets traps to lure the Ironborn to their own destruction. I don't know why this sentence suddenly appeared in Viserys' mind. Since the storm god is the eternal enemy of the drowned god in the Ironborn's belief, then the target of this raven is not the drowned god. Roar, however, while Viserys was thinking, a loud roar suddenly came from the turbulent sea. This sound made the entire angry sea even more violent, and the huge waves raised were 100 meters high, as if they could touch the sky. Even Viserys, who was in deep thought, was startled. He quickly raised his head and looked in the direction of the sea. Then he saw a huge sea beast with a winding and strong body, covered with cold scales, and a long fin on its back. Its figure disappeared in the raging waves and roared to the sky. Its scalded eyes were full of madness, as if it was declaring war on the giant crow that was stirring up storms and thunder above its head. What is this? When Viserys saw this giant beast hidden in the waves, his heart skipped a beat. Even someone like him who had seen big scenes was shocked by the battle between these mythical beasts. The body length of this sea beast is definitely more than 100 meters, and the figure hidden under the waves is even larger, even hundreds or thousands of meters long. Compared to it, the crow, which is as big as a calf, seems to be less eye-catching. Is it the drowned god? Viserys stood in the void and witnessed this mythical battle with his own eyes. He couldn't help but feel a little throbbing in his heart and vaguely guessed the identity of the other party. Because in the myth of the Ironborn, the drowned god and the storm god are eternal enemies. Since it is speculated that the crow is a storm god, then the enemy against him is the legendary drowned god. Is the drowned god a sea dragon? No, to be more precise, it seems more like a sea serpent. The giant beast in the waves was covered with cold scales, and on its back were fins and external skeletons that only marine creatures have, but it did not grow wings. During the fight with the crow, it was always hidden in the waves. It seemed that it could not fly. Viserys forced himself to calm down and think seriously. At first, he associated the other party with the dragon in his memory. However, a closer look showed that the two were only similar in appearance, but in fact there was still a big difference. This beast was more like a giant sea serpent than a sea dragon. Chapter 711 People on the wooden boat. The battle between the crows and the sea snakes set off a huge wave, and dark clouds covered the sky, and thunder roared in the midst of it. The two fought each other to the point of killing each other. A large number of crows died in the huge waves, and the black crow corpses covered the sea surface. The giant sea snake was also bruised under the bombardment of the thunder, and the blood that flowed out dyed the sea red. However, no bloodthirsty sea killers were attracted by the blood. They all hid in the distance and trembled in fear. And Viserys was completely immersed in this battle of gods and couldn't extricate himself. The fight between the ancient mythical beasts was bloody. But at this time, a scene that shocked Viserys happened. A dilapidated wooden boat suddenly rushed out of the turbulent waves, and on this wooden boat stood a human in a grey cloak. He carried an ancient longsword on his back, and with his sturdy arms, he grasped the oars tightly. He used his unparalleled skills to control the old wooden boat that looked shabby and ready to fall. He rode the wind and waves, penetrated the violent wind and waves, and headed for the sea snake. What? Viserys, who was immersed in the desperate fight with the mythical beast, was instantly attracted by this wooden boat. He saw this wooden boat that rode the wind and waves, and was almost overturned by the waves several times, and the sailor who was driving the wooden boat. He did not hesitate at all in the face of the crisis of death, and still drove straight towards the sea snake. Who is he? Viserys was a little overwhelmed, because in his opinion, this kind of ship-controlled technology has reached a level that has never been seen before, and will never be seen again. When he was a child, he followed the Dragonstone fleet to the expedition to Storm's End, so he saw with his own eyes how small the ships controlled by humans looked under the wind and waves. Even a huge ship that is countless times larger than this wooden boat cannot remain stable under such waves, but the wind and waves raised by the sea snakes and crows are almost comparable to the unprecedented storm on the narrow sea. And this is the center of the storm. Although this shabby wooden boat seems to be almost overturned several times, it still stumbles towards the sea snake. Who is he? What does he want to do? Viserys looked at the wooden boat and the strong human wearing a grey cloak on the boat, and his heart moved slightly, and many questions arose. He didn't know what era he was in now, but he knew that such a human and such a war would definitely leave mark in history. Viserys decided that after the matter here was over, he must start to read some historical materials and check the origins of this human wearing a grey cloak with a sword on his back and this terrifying sea snake. However, now, he is more concerned about what happened next. The giant sea snake in the sea was fighting with the crows above its head, and all its attention fell on the old enemy soaring in the sky. Because its attention was attracted to the sky, it did not notice that a wooden boat on the sea was approaching it quietly. The black crow covered with thunder in the sky seemed to be deliberately covering for this human. It kept making sharp and piercing cries, summoning thunder to attract the attention of the giant sea snake. It flew very fast, carrying thunder all over its body, and piercing through the layers of dark clouds, accompanied by high-pitched cries. However, at this time, the wooden boat finally approached the huge body of the sea snake after countless difficulties. The sailor on the bow, wearing a grey cloak, and with a face that could not be seen clearly, threw away the oar in his hand, then stood up from the bow, and drew the long sword behind him. What is he going to do? Viserys, who was suspended in the void, and overlooking the battle, condensed his eyes slightly. This was the nth time he asked this question, because the other party's actions were too shocking. Unfortunately, the huge sea snake finally noticed the little guy beside it. Then it roared, and its strong body slammed into the poor little wooden boat. The wooden boat was instantly shattered, leaving only driftwood floating on the sea, and the little man on the boat disappeared on the waves. What a pity. Viserys sighed slightly when he saw this scene. He originally thought that this young man with extremely terrible boat control skills was going to do something shocking, but he was discovered by the sea snake at the last moment and smashed the wooden boat into pieces with one blow. Then his eyes fell back to the battle between the sea snake and the crow. He felt that this person was dead, and falling into such a storm would definitely be a sure death. The crow also saw that the human was discovered by his mortal enemy at the last moment, and then disappeared in the waves, and immediately let out an angry cry. It seemed that it had also been preparing for this battle for a long time. However, the sea snake could roll up the waves and reach the sky, while the crow could call storms and thunder to constantly bombard the sea snake. But it seemed that neither side could do anything to the other. The crow had no way to rush into the waves to fight the sea snake, and the sea snake had not grown wings to fly into the sky. Therefore, the fight between the two mythical beasts seemed to end in vain. However, at this moment, an unexpected scene happened. Puff, the human who had just been smashed by the sea snake and overturned into the sea water, seemed to struggle to climb onto the back of the sea snake. He spit out the choked sea water and tightly grasped the scales of the sea snake. He was very good at swimming, and the waves could not do anything to him. He tightly grasped the scales of the sea snake without letting go, then raised his head and looked into the distance, his eyes full of determination, and then climbed towards the top of the sea snake step by step with difficulty. And Viserys, who did not belong to this era in the air, couldn't help holding his breath when he saw this scene. This man. He even had a sense of tension, as if he were actually there. Viserys seemed to have put himself into the body of this struggling young man, moving forward step by step for his goal, and never retreating. Unfortunately, the young man's sword seemed to have fallen into the sea, floating in the waves that had just been overturned. Viserys couldn't help but want to pick up the sword for him, but he held back, because he knew that this was just a memory of the past, not something that was happening in reality. Did he succeed in the end? This question popped up in Viserys' mind, but he didn't know the answer yet. Then, a sharp bird cry came from above Viserys' head again, and the crow, flying at an extremely fast speed, was wrapped in thunder. It seemed to have discovered this problem, and then dived below the sea surface for the first time, directly reaching the lowest height it had never reached before, and even the sea snake rolled up the waves and its tail could shake it. However, the crow was flying very fast. It took great risks to penetrate the wind and waves, and suddenly picked up the long sword, like an eagle flying in the sky, and then flew high into the sky again, avoiding the powerful blow of the sea snake's tail. It held the long sword in its mouth and flew to the sky above the young man, then opened its mouth and threw the sword down. Chapter 712, Grey Seeking. The sea snake floating in the waves below also noticed this. It opened its huge mouth full of fangs and roared, as if it wanted to smash the sword, but it was a step too late. The sword fell from the sky and landed accurately in the hands of the human in the grey cloak. At this moment, his clothes had been wet by the cold sea water, and the hood on his head had fallen off, revealing a full head of grey hair and an ordinary and resolute face. His eyes were also grey, but full of determination. Go to hell. Then he held the long sword in his hand and rushed to the top of the sea snake's head, then raised it high and stabbed it fiercely. Roar. The huge sea snake suddenly let out a huge roar that was countless times louder than before. The sound vibrated out to an unknown distance, and the waves raised pushed the crows above his head back again. This sword seemed to contain terrifying magic, and it had an unparalleled killing power against this sea snake. He actually succeeded. What will happen next? Viserys had been staring at the battle below, and his heart was also surging. He did not expect to see such a shocking battle. After lighting the crow skull with the divine fire, the crows in the sky that were forced back by the waves also stared at the bottom like Viserys and kept making sharp cries. Because the human was the lucky one chosen by him, he gave him a weapon that could kill sea snakes and a treasure that could shuttle through the waves, just to let this inconspicuous mortal assassinate his mortal enemy and get the thing he dreamed of. However, now that the human succeeded, the crow's eyes revealed irrepressible joy and tension. It wanted to fly down immediately to take Naga's fire from her body, but the crow was extremely cautious by nature. It was hesitating. It had to confirm that the other party was really dead before it dared to fly down. But at this time, something unexpected happened to the crow. Before dying, the giant sea snake struggled to sink to the depths of the sea, dragging the hero who assassinated the sea snake into the cold sea water until the other party was completely submerged. Seeing this scene, the crow immediately made a sharp cry and dived towards the sea surface, trying to take the fire from the sea snake's body first. However, at the last moment, it seemed to be concerned about whether the other party was faking defeat, so it set a trap to lure it close and then kill it directly. The crow was suspicious and hesitated on the sea surface, but the ruthless deep sea was gradually swallowing up the huge sea snake's body and the hero who assassinated it, and the boiling blood dyed the entire sea red. The young hero with a grey cloak and grey hair seemed to want to struggle, but he couldn't escape no matter what, and his mouth was choked by a few mouthfuls of cold sea water. The treasure he wore seemed to be infected by the blood of the sea snake and lost its function until he was dragged into the deep sea and let out a silent, desperate roar. Viserys witnessed the tragic scene and couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. At the same time, he had some more guesses about the gray-haired man. He thought of a legendary person. However, when Viserys was thinking, the scene in front of him changed and became something else. An old man with gray hair, gray eyes and a driftwood crown on his head, drew the long sword at his waist and roared to declare war on the storm above his head. Behind him followed many warriors from the Iron Islands. The crow flying through the storm was the one from before, but its size seemed to have grown a lot, and its appearance had also undergone some earth-shaking changes. His beak was sharper, calling for more violent winds and rainstorms. The sky was dark with clouds and thunder. Sure enough, Viserys narrowed his eyes slightly when he saw the scene in front of him, and he understood a little more. He recognized at a glance that the old man with gray hair, gray eyes and a driftwood crown who appeared behind him was the young brave who had assassinated the sea snake alone before. He didn't know how the other party escaped from the deep sea under the eyes of the crows. However, he didn't know how many years had passed. He had become old. But the young human who was used by the god of storms had already possessed the power to rival the gods. He was the Grey King who had countless legends among the Ironborn. At this moment, the legendary Grey King stood in the hall he built with the remains of the sea serpent named Naga. The mouth of the sea serpent became his throne, and the ribs of the sea serpent became the pillars supporting the hall. The walls of the hall were covered with brocade woven with silver seaweed, and the warriors who followed the Grey King gathered around a huge starfish-shaped table to enjoy the gifts of the sea. Their chairs were made of mother of pearl. As the fire of faith gradually penetrated into the white crow skull, Viserys gradually absorbed some of its past memories and learned the whole story. A large amount of information continued to pour in, and Viserys also understood where the legend of the feud between the god of storms and the drowned god came from. It turns out that the sea serpent he once thought was the drowned god was not actually the drowned god. It was the first sea dragon in the world, named Naga. It is the most powerful creature born in the sea. It feeds on sea monsters and sea beasts, and can swallow entire islands when angry. However, sea dragons have disappeared in the long river of history, so Viserys has never seen or heard of them. He even mistakenly thought that the other party was a giant sea serpent, because it was obviously different from the commonly known dragons in this world. At the same time, Naga, the first sea dragon born in the world, is also the enemy of the god of storms, because the crow that can stir up storms wants to kill it and get the Naga fire in its body, so wars often break out between the two. And the battles between them often take place in the Sunset Sea, because the habitat of Naga is near the Iron Islands. Crows often fly over to duel with Naga when they have nothing to do, and the battle between crows and sea dragons is extremely fierce, stirring up strong winds and raging waves, making the surrounding people miserable. The Grey King witnessed the disaster caused by the storm and tsunami, so he was determined to eradicate the two monsters that were causing troubles in the Iron Islands and the people around them. Then the Grey King traveled thousands of miles to find the hometown of the crow and expressed his willingness to help it eliminate the Naga and calm the surrounding sea disasters. The crow gave the Grey King a treasure that could smoothly pass through the storm, as well as a weapon that could kill the Naga. Chapter 713 Kiss. In the end, the Grey Sea King successfully killed the sea dragon Naga with the two treasures given to him by the god of storms. However, the god of storms did not get the Naga fire that he had dreamed of, because the Grey Sea King and Naga's body sank into the deep sea together and drowned alive. After the Grey Sea King's body sank to the bottom of the sea along with Naga's body, he accidentally got Naga's fire and obtained this power that could rival the gods. Therefore, the Grey Sea King became the supreme god who was drowned by countless iron races and then walked out of the deep sea again. The god of storms felt that he had been deceived, and now Naga's fire was in this human's body, so the angry crows once again declared war on the Grey Sea King and vowed to kill all his people. But this time the Grey Sea King did not retreat, just as he bravely drove the wooden boat alone to the sea dragon Naga. So the drowned god, who was supported by countless iron races, and the cunning and evil storm god started a 1,000-year-long battle. According to legend, the Grey King lived for thousands of years. During this period, he married a mermaid princess and gave birth to 100 sons for him. These sons had the blood of the Grey King and the mermaid princess and could live freely on land and sea. In the end, the Grey King's remaining blood became many families that ruled the Iron Islands in the future. All the Iron races, including the Greyjoy family and the Greyaran family, claimed that their bloodline could be traced back to the Grey King and his descendants in the Age of Heroes, with the exception of the Gubara family, who believed that they were descendants of the Grey King's loyal brother. However, these are legends recorded by later generations. In fact, the Age of Heroes was 8,000 to 10,000 years ago. Today, the oldest historical records of mankind were written after the Andals came to Westeros. Because the ancestors did not have any specific writing, they only left a large number of runes, which were carved on rocks and some objects. Therefore, the so-called historical facts about the Age of Dawn, the Age of Heroes and the Long Night that people generally thought they knew, were actually all supplemented by monks thousands of years later. Because of this, many histories have been interrupted and rely entirely on people's speculation. The doctors of the Citadel do not believe in some kings who have ruled for hundreds of years and knights who have galloped for thousands of years in history, because there was no system of knights at that time, and they did not believe that someone could live for hundreds or thousands of years. However, when Viserys opened his eyes again in the cellar of the Red Castle, he still felt a little lost. He sat there in a daze, and Merryx's and Jon Connington on the side all looked over. "Your Majesty, how is it? What just happened?" Jon Connington asked with a slightly anxious voice. Viserys' whole body was bathed in thunder and lightning, and this thunder contained divine power, and was not ordinary, so they did not dare to approach. After a long while, Viserys finally opened his eyes again, but he sat there in a daze for a long time. How could this not make people worry? "Oh, don't worry. I'm fine." Viserys came back to his senses after hearing Jon Clinton's words, and then shook his head and said, "Huh." However, at this moment, Viserys seemed to be keenly aware of something. He had just woken up and didn't pay attention, but now he suddenly noticed it when he woke up. Then he turned his head and looked to the side, and then he saw a skirt hidden behind the black dragon bones. Rhaenys had just sneaked in. She wanted to chat with Viserys and see what he was doing hiding in the cellar of the Red Castle all day long and guarding a pile of dragon bones. However, Rhaenys didn't expect to secretly see such a horrifying scene. Her cheap brother was bathed in golden flames all over his body, illuminating the entire cellar. Soon after, the golden flames on his body suddenly turned into thunder scattered in the air, and he couldn't help but frown, as if he had encountered a trouble. Rhaenys didn't know what happened, but she was about to run up to help Viserys, or call Grand Maester Marwyn for him, but at this moment, Viserys opened his eyes, and everything disappeared in the dust. Rhaenys didn't want Viserys to find out that she had deceived the guards and sneaked in, so she quickly hid behind a tall and silent black dragon bone. However, something even more horrifying happened to her. Viserys suddenly spoke to the air, as if there was really someone beside him chatting with him. There was no flaw in his behavior. Rhaenys was frightened and shivered all over, so she didn't dare to come out from behind the dragon bone. She secretly wondered if Viserys was crazy, or if there was really a guest beside him that she couldn't see. But at this moment, Viserys suddenly stopped talking, and the whole cellar suddenly became quiet. Rhaenys' heart was in her throat, and then she was pulled out by Viserys. After listening to the girls crying with her head down and pinching the corner of her clothes, she turned her head left and right in fear, fearing that there were really ghosts around Viserys. However, after hearing this, Viserys was a little bit amused, because Jon Clinton was floating beside Rhaenys at this moment, and she just turned her head and couldn't see him at such a close distance. But this matter is a bit complicated to explain. Viserys thought for a moment, and then told Rhaenys that he would definitely tell her when he had time in the future. Really? After hearing what Viserys said, the girl who was a little scared just now completely changed her attention, because in her opinion, Viserys would never hurt her, so no matter what ghosts there were, since Viserys knew about it, there would definitely be no danger to her. Of course. And Viserys nodded. "You are so nice." Then the girl with long brown hair pecked Viserys on the forehead without anyone being able to react. Her face instantly turned red. It seemed that this sudden action not only frightened Viserys, but also frightened herself. Then Rhaenys did not dare to turn around and look directly into Viserys' eyes, but ran away in a hurry. The silver-haired young man was still sitting cross-legged in the same place, watching the girl's back as she ran away. He was slightly stunned for a long time, as if he still hadn't come back to his senses, but in fact he was asking himself a question. He should have been able to dodge it just now, right? He has the ability of the Eye of Moment, so even if the Night King attacked him at this distance, he should have been able to react. But what happened just now? Chapter 714 Reign. Then, Viserys recalled the thrilling moment at the last moment. The Grey King, also known as the Drowned God, and the Raven, who could summon storms, also known as the evil storm god in the mouths of the Ironborn, fought for 1,000 years. The last scene he saw was the final battle between the two. At that time, the Grey King held the sword that the Raven had given him to kill the gods, and personally cut off the Raven's head. But at the same time, the Raven's counterattack before death also severely damaged the Grey King's soul, almost making him lose his soul immediately. In fact, the Grey King's body was originally a floating corpse. He had been drowned when he killed the sea dragon Naga in his youth. Therefore, the last Grey King knew that his time was running out, so he left his driftwood crown, took the sword that could kill the gods, and walked into the sea, and then completely disappeared, never coming out again. From then on, in order to commemorate this great king who was drowned for them, the ancestors living on the Iron Islands honored the Grey King as the drowned god. However, the ancestors did not have specific characters to express their meanings, only some runes that were difficult to decipher. In addition, as time went by, people passed down from generation to generation, and eventually the drowned god was the supreme god of the Ironborn, while the Grey King was great, but he was just a mortal. The identities of the drowned god and the Grey King were separated by later generations, from one person to two people. In the legends of the Ironborn in later generations, the Grey King stepped into the sea before his death because of his outstanding achievements, and was invited to the drowned god's flowing water palace for a feast, and even the Grey King was invited to sit on the right side of the drowned god. During the 1,000 years of his reign, the Grey King asked the ancestors of the Iron Islands to be self-reliant and grow food from the barren land, but in later generations, he was praised as an ancient way of plunder. The Ironborn in later generations believed that the drowned god created the Ironborn, and the drowned god asked them to rape and plunder, create a new world with blood, flames, and songs, and use them to carve their names. But in fact, the oldest iron races in the Iron Islands were not created by any god. They were some of the ancestors who migrated from the Dornarm. Most of them chose to stay in the Greenland, and a small part landed on the Iron Islands. Later, with the continuous invasion of the Andals, the mixed blood of the Andals and the ancestors became the mainstream of the Iron Islands. Therefore, the Iron races and most of the races in Westeros are originally one family. They also believe that the drowned god brought fire from the sea and sailed the world with fire and sword, but in fact it was the Grey King who drowned countless iron people and brought the fire of the Naga from the sea. Viserys saw some important memories of the Raven, and also indirectly saw the life of the Grey King. The Grey King is the drowned god. Viserys had never thought of this before, and there was no historical evidence to support it, but this happened thousands or even tens of thousands of years ago. It is too long ago, and it is normal for the story to go astray. The Raven's head was chopped off by the Grey King, but it did not die on the spot. It can still make angry cries, and its body keeps calling for storms. Then the Grey King, who was already seriously injured and whose soul was about to dissipate, suppressed the head and body of the crow, and made them unable to overlap forever. The soul of the crow has fallen into darkness forever since then, and has never broken the seal again. The most recent revival was more than 10 years ago. Its seal had reached its weakest level. It exhausted its divine power and evoked the largest storm in the history of the Narrow Sea, hoping to escape from it. But the Green Prophet, who has always maintained the balance on the continent of Westeros, noticed this, so he sent his sword Dark Sister to suppress the revival of the crow. Then the crow fell into a deep sleep again, because of the exhaustion of divine power, until Viserys awakened it with the divine fire. Viserys read the memory of the crow's life, but most of it was destroyed in the crow's final counterattack before death, which made Viserys feel very sorry. However, the crow's counterattack at that time was still very dangerous. Viserys was immersed in the other party's memory and couldn't extricate himself and didn't notice that the danger had quietly arrived. It wanted to seize Viserys' body like Brynden Rivers did in the past and be reborn. However, like Brynden Rivers, it did not expect that Viserys, a mortal, had such terrible mental power. It was just pretending to be a pig and eating a tiger. However, unlike the situation at that time, this crow that could call up storms and was called the god of storms by the Ironborn was a real god after all. Even though it had been suppressed for thousands of years and its soul was extremely weak, it was not an easy guy to deal with. A fierce battle of souls broke out between Viserys and it. It was when Merryx's John Connington and Rhaenys saw Viserys frowning slightly and thunder flashing on his body. Then Viserys relied on his power of the old gods and the background brought by the mysterious black fog to finally defeat this crow that could call up storms. But the other party did not choose to fulfill Viserys, but dispersed most of his soul and finally disappeared completely from this world. Viserys absorbed part of the crow's residual soul, which was transformed into black mist, and entered his body. In addition to the mental power reaching the limit of 39, all other attributes suddenly rose by a large margin. However, these are only a small part of the gains. His biggest gain is the crow skull in front of him, which has faded from the glitz, and is now simple and white. Viserys placed his palm on the crow skull, and then heard the faint sound of thunder coming from the cellar of the Red Castle. "It's raining." The blush on Rhaenys' face, who had just run out of the Red Castle cellar door, had not completely dissipated. She didn't know what happened to her just now, why she suddenly kissed Viserys so impulsively. However, she regretted it immediately, but didn't know how to deal with it. She could only run out with a blushing face. But when Rhaenys just ran out, the sky above her head was still very bright and sunny. Just as she was slightly stunned, the sky of King's Landing suddenly darkened. Boom boom, rolling dark clouds gathered at some point, and then there was a loud explosion of thunder, which scared the brown-haired girl, and a heavy rain poured down immediately. What's going on with this rain? It's so strange. Why does it rain so suddenly? Rhaenys didn't know what was going on, so she could only quickly hold up her skirt and run into the corridor, where she could take shelter from the rain. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 715 Dawn Mission. There are many people in King's Landing who are as strange as Rhaenys. Because this rain came too suddenly, the sky was clear just now, and it rained heavily in an instant. I don't know how many innocent passers-by were soaked before they could hide from the rain. Now the dark clouds are pressing down on the city, and there are lightning and thunder in the sky, just like the end of the world. What's going on? The highest point of King's Landing, the Imperial Palace on Aegon's High Hill. Princess Dawn, who has been promoted to queen by her husband, stood in front of the balcony of Meager's tower with her daughter Diana in her arms, looking at the heavy rain outside the window, with a little worry on her face. Because anyone can see that this rain is not unusual, this is definitely not the effect of normal climate change, as if there is a big hand behind the scenes controlling it. Someone who can control the climate? Is this still a person? Irian has the blood of Dawn, so her skin is slightly darker and her eyes are deep, but her waist is slender and her figure is very plump. Giving birth did not have much impact on her figure. She was holding her daughter in her arms, thinking about the possible impact of this heavy rain. Some people might criticize her husband for this, because natural disasters and man-made disasters are often related to the inaction of the king or emperor, such as angering the gods. This kind of method can only be used by the gods. On the other hand, Irian was a little worried about her father, because Viserys ordered her father, Prince Doran, to come to King's Landing to personally explain the rebellion of Sky and City and some Dornish lords, and now her father came by boat, and he might be arriving in King's Landing soon. If he caught up with such a big storm, there might be some danger. Irian thought about these messy things in her heart, and then sighed worriedly. I hope nothing will happen. What do you think, Diana? Then Irian looked down at her daughter who was sleeping soundly in her arms. She didn't sleep in the middle of the night and got up to make a fuss, and now she was so sleepy that she couldn't open her eyes in the afternoon. However, the child can fall asleep as soon as he wants without worries and pressure, which makes Irian a little envious. The lightning and thunder outside the window can't wake up the little princess. She gently kissed Diana's cheek, then turned and walked into the room. However, Irian never thought that this heavy rain might be the work of Viserys. Therefore, this downpour came and went quickly. Just now, the city was covered with dark clouds, and it looked like the end of the world. Thick lightning kept crossing the sky. It was still afternoon, but it seemed like midnight, and it was almost difficult to see your fingers. Some people in King's Landing were also panicked. The monks in the Great Sept of St. Bela were panicked and kept kowtowing and praying. They didn't know what happened, thinking that they had done something to anger the gods. However, not long after, this heavy rain stopped abruptly, just like it came. Not long after, the thick clouds above the head dissipated, and the sun hidden behind it reappeared, and the bright sunshine sprinkled on the washed streets of King's Landing again. Even the foul stench in the lower city of King's Landing has dissipated a lot. Viserys once ordered the allocation of funds to transform the sewer pipes of the entire city to attack the city, requiring that the problem of air pollution in King's Landing must be solved. However, the transformation of the sewer pipes is actually not that easy. The city of King's Landing is very large and densely populated, so it will take longer. Can this artifact control the climate? When Viserys walked out of the cellar of the Red Castle, he watched the thick haze above his head gradually dissipate, and the sun was shining on the earth again, and then he retracted his gaze and looked at the raven's head in his hand. To be precise, it can call storms. John Connington asked with some excitement, because as the commander who once led the Targaryen army, he certainly understood how great it would be for his side to have a treasure that could call the wind and rain. However, Viserys was much calmer than John Connington. He frowned slightly and looked at the raven skull in his hand, thinking about how to use it to the greatest extent. However, there is no doubt that this is definitely a treasure with supernatural power in this world, especially in naval battles. It can call storms to destroy the enemy's fleet, and it can also disperse the storms encountered by its own side. In this way, the sea has become flat since then, and the Targaryen fleet can sail to any corner of the world with this ability. And a few days later, that short storm has become the hottest topic in King's Landing recently. People express their opinions and have their own ideas. Some people believe that someone in King's Landing is experimenting with evil magic, and the spearhead is directed at a bachelor with an independent laboratory in the Imperial Medical School. Because it was recently revealed that some unnamed corpses were transported to his laboratory for evil dissection. For the believers of the seven gods, destroying corpses is definitely an unforgivable crime. And some people think that it is a witch's work, and there are things like ghosts, and even more people think that the seven gods are dissatisfied with His Majesty the Emperor, because the continent of Westeros is now full of pagans. But no one thinks it is a normal weather phenomenon, because this is something that even the bachelor staying in King's Landing cannot explain. Dr. Ambrose even sent a letter to Old Town to ask his friend, Doctor of Astronomy Vine Garverin, but he has not received a reply yet. King's Landing is the capital of the Empire. The people here are naturally well fed and clothed, so they have a lot of fun gossiping to kill time in their spare time. However, every topic will eventually get boring, not to mention that people are just guessing, and there is no follow-up story, so they are soon attracted by another piece of news. That is, the Dawn delegation that was rumored to come to King's Landing a long time ago has finally arrived. There is a very important person among them. Just from the guards of this delegation, it is enough to see the high standards. He is the Dawn Prince Doran Melismartle, the father-in-law of His Majesty the Emperor. He will come to the Iron Throne to personally explain the reasons for the Dawn Rebellion, and the big ship he is on with the flag of the Martell family has just sailed into Blackwater Bay. At this moment, Quentyn Martell, the eldest son of the Martell family, was riding a warhorse, accompanied by a dozen unsullied guards drawn from the palace. Tyrion Lannister, the Emperor's personal advisor, the harbour master of King's Landing, and the chief of the Imperial Customs, the Onion Knight Davos Seaworth, also appeared here, waiting to welcome Prince Doran. Chapter 2 Wait. Chapter 716 Prince Deolang. However, Oberyn and Arion did not appear at the welcoming scene. Because Oberyn is now an important official of the Imperial Council, he needs to avoid suspicion with his brother, so Oberyn did not appear at the welcoming scene. Irion's status was elevated because of Viserys. Although she is the daughter of Prince Doran, she is also the queen of the empire and the mother of the country. Not to mention that Prince Doran is no longer qualified to let his daughter go to greet him in person. He even needs to sit in a wheelchair and bow to Irion. There are many other people of King's Landing watching in the port of Blackwater Bay. They are also working nearby. When they saw the flag of the Martell family, they put down their work and looked over. Pull over. Pull over. Drop anchor. The big ship flying the flag of the Golden Spear soon docked successfully at the berth under the command of the port staff of Blackwater Bay, and then lowered the wooden planks for people to get on and off, to connect the pier and the ship. Tyrion, the royal representative, and Avos, the port representative, looked at each other, then walked up quickly and came to the deck. As the ere of dawn, the young Quentyn Martell had already urged his horse to the front of the ship, then turned over and dismounted. There were more than a dozen unsullied soldiers beside him. Not long after, the sound of a wheelchair rolling was finally heard on the deck of the cabin. A tall and burly man stood majestically in front of the deck holding a 6-foot-long axe. Although his hair was already grey, anyone who looked down on him, because of his age, would pay a heavy price. His eyes swept coldly over the crowd below, holding the axe, but he didn't say a word. What a powerful general. My lord, is he Prince Doran? The servant following behind Tyrion couldn't help but ask, but was glanced at by his master. As far as I know, Prince Doran has to sit in a wheelchair because of gout and other reasons, and has not appeared in public for many years. The man in front of him was obviously not Prince Doran, but in King's Landing, the Dornish were called barbarians, and there were even rumors that they would eat children alive, so it was not surprising that someone would mistakenly think that the strong man in front of him was Prince Doran. However, a Dornish soldier then appeared on the deck pushing a wheelchair. Sitting on the wheelchair was a middle-aged man with grey hair and a thin figure. He was wearing a gorgeous brocade robe and had the emblem of the Sunspear Martell family on his shoulders. There were some wrinkles on the middle-aged man's forehead. His skin color did not have many salty features like Oberyn and Irion, perhaps because he often did not see the sun. His eyes were deep, and he was calmly looking down at the crowd below. Father. Seeing Prince Doran appear, Quentyn Martell, as the eldest son, hurriedly stepped forward to greet him. Prince Doran nodded slightly, and the Dornish soldier behind him who was responsible for pushing the wheelchair also pushed his wheelchair down from the deck and onto the dock at the port. My son. When Prince Doran saw his son, a little ripple appeared in his calm eyes. Quentyn had grown a lot taller than when he left Sunspear, and his body looked much stronger, and his words were more calm than before. It seemed that Quentyn had grown up a little in King's Landing, following his sister. Although Prince Doran was satisfied, his voice was still not very volatile, and his face was calm. Prince Doran. Prince Doran. At this time, the royal envoy who was also waiting to welcome Prince Doran to King's Landing, and the representatives of the local units, Tyrion and Avos, also hurried up. Tyrion tidied his appearance, coughed lightly, and silently organized his words, then lowered his head according to the rules and spoke in a proper tone. Dear guest, welcome to King's Landing. I'm here to greet you on royal orders. I'm Tyrion Lannister, the personal advisor of His Majesty Viserys, the Emperor of Valyria. And this is Lord Davos Seaworth, the head of the Empire's customs and the harbour master of King's Landing. Your Highness. Tyrion introduced himself quickly, then turned around and introduced the Onion Knight who was traveling with him. The Onion Knight, standing behind him, bowed his head slightly and saluted again. The thin grey-haired middle-aged man sitting in a wheelchair narrowed his eyes slightly when he heard Tyrion's last name. In fact, he had already seen him in the cabin just now. Looking at the other person's obviously taller than an ordinary person's figure, coupled with the name of the most famous dwarf in Westeros, Prince Doran had already guessed the other person's identity. Then looking at Tyrion's outstretched palm, he finally nodded slightly and stretched out his hand to shake hands with Tyrion. Lord Tyrion Lannister. Lord Davos Seaworth. Prince Doran then looked at the Onion Knight and shook hands with the famous smuggler. One of the most famous dwarfs in Westeros, and another equally famous smuggler. Although it is not a good thing for a smuggler to be famous, they now both hold important positions in the court of King's Landing. Viserys was indeed not particular about employing people, and it was the era when the number of civilians in the court was the largest in history. Although the Martell family had made an engagement with the Targaryen family a long time ago, Prince Doran betrothed his daughter to Viserys, who was still wandering in a foreign country at the time. The two have even been married for many years, and have a daughter. But this was the first time that Prince Doran met his son-in-law, and even in such a passive situation, seeing the two people who came to greet him, Prince Doran had a preliminary understanding of his son-in-law besides the rumors. Although Prince Doran did not want outsiders to see his weak appearance since the onset of gout, and had not walked out of the water garden for many years, he still had a special carriage for travel. After the simple welcome ceremony, the special carriage transported from Dorne was also pulled off the ship, and the giant who appeared at the beginning and dozens of Dornish soldiers accompanied it. Prince Doran was pushed into the carriage in a wheelchair, and then the curtain of the carriage was lowered. It was difficult to see the figure inside from the outside. Then the wheels slowly rolled towards the direction of the Red Castle, and Prince Quentyn and the accompanying unsullied soldiers, Tyrion Lannister, the Onion Knight and others followed beside them. Traitor. Dornish barbarian. However, at this time, some abuses were heard on both sides of the road to King's Landing port. Chapter 717 Conflict. Rebels. Barbarians. There was a sudden commotion among the crowds watching on both sides of the road at the Mudgate. Some even spoke rudely to the carriage of the Prince of Dorne. The young Prince of Dorne was furious when he saw his father being humiliated. "Shut up, you lowly bastards." The dozens of Dornish soldiers following their own prince's carriage suddenly became nervous and tightened their scimitars and shields. "You are traitors. The Dornish are ungrateful wolves." That's right. They are a group of uncivilized barbarians. However, Prince Quentyn's rebuke did not make these voices disappear. Instead, more accusations and foul language appeared. Because of some of their previous actions and historical factors, the Dornish were not very popular in all parts of Westeros. Everyone disliked the Dornish because their culture, appearance, beliefs, accents, etc. were quite different from the mainstream culture of Westeros. But the River Gate, also known as the Mudgate by the people, is where the lower class population of King's Landing is concentrated. There are all kinds of people, and there are many people watching the Dornish delegation on both sides of the road. Although the young Dornish prince is angry, he has no way to find out who made such a sound in the crowd. However, at this moment, a stone was thrown out from somewhere in the crowd and hit Prince Doran's carriage with a bang. Clang 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 clang. Protect the prince. Protect your highness. As soon as this stone was thrown, the situation on the scene changed immediately. The Dornish soldiers who were waiting in full battle array drew their scimitars at their waists and raised their shields high. The giant holding the giant axe also showed anger. "Find this person." On the other side, the unsullied soldiers following Quentyn instantly formed an iron barrel formation to protect Prince Doran's carriage in the center. Oops. Seeing this scene, Tyrion and the Onion Knight who were following the carriage looked at each other and saw that things were not going well in each other's eyes, and then they quickly turned over and dismounted. "Calm down. Everyone, calm down." Tyrion and Davos ran over to be peacemakers, but the Prince of Dorne, who was hot-headed and furious at the moment, could not listen to them. "I will kill you." Quentyn Martell immediately drew the long sword from his waist while sitting on horseback, pointing it directly at the people who were making trouble. It seemed that he wanted to rush over and kill this group of people. However, at this moment, a calm and unquestionable voice suddenly came from the carriage. "Aeryo, stop him." The insulted Prince Doran still seemed very calm. He was not blinded by anger and calmly ordered his captain of the guards, the strong man Arya Hotta holding a huge axe, to stop Quentyn from killing people in the street. The strong man was also furious. If he could find out who threw the stone, he would definitely chop the other person with an axe. But just as his eyes were searching, he suddenly heard Prince Doran's order. Then Arya handed the axe in his hand to one hand without any hesitation, and with the other hand, he directly lifted Prince Quentyn, who was drawing his sword, to kill someone beside him, off the horse's back, as easily as lifting a chicken. "What are you doing? Let me go. I'm going to kill him." However, the black-haired boy wanted to struggle, but was shocked by Area Hot's low voice. Your Highness, this is the prince's order. Quentin immediately became depressed. He was most afraid of his father, since he was a child. He seemed to be able to see through people's hearts. He often defeated Quentin without saying a word, just by looking at him. There was a lot of noise on both sides of the road. The convoy was safe and sound under the protection of Dornish soldiers and the Unsullied. The nearby capital garrison also rushed over to maintain order after hearing the news. The untouchables were beaten with sticks and fled in all directions. Then the convoy of the Dornish delegation left the river gate under protection. In order to prevent any more accidents, they did not choose to take the narrow hook lane, but went straight from the muddy road to the main road that spanned the northwest and southeast corners of King's Landing, and then went straight to the Red Castle. Now in the throne room on Egan's Hill, there are many local nobles and imperial officials in King's Landing, who are waiting for the arrival of Prince Doran. The inquiries and explanations in the throne room of King's Landing did not last too long. Viserys called Prince Doran to Dorne mainly to intimidate and force Dorne to bow his head, rather than really listening to what he said. What he said is not important, but his attitude of coming or not is the most important. If Prince Doran received the imperial edict, but refused to go to King's Landing to explain, then Viserys would have to ride Balerion and tens of thousands of imperial soldiers to Sunspear to invite his father-in-law. But the situation at that time might be a little difficult to end. There are many people in Dorne who want to provoke war, but I have seen war. In the garden of the Red Keep, Irian and her maid Sansa took their daughter to play on the lawn under the shade of the trees, while Viserys sat under the umbrella beside and chatted with Prince Doran. The formal audience in the throne room ended, and then it was time for family to spend time together. After all, Prince Doran was his father-in-law. I have seen corpses piled up like mountains on the battlefield. I have seen orphans starving to death in the city. Prince Doran was still sitting in his wheelchair, but the Dornish guards who came to escort him had no way to enter the Red Keep, so the wheelchair could only be pushed by Prince Doran's guard captain Arya Hotap. His great axe was also temporarily confiscated after entering the throne room. Your Majesty. The burly white-haired giant pushed the wheelchair and saluted respectfully when he saw Viserys. Even though they had been humiliated when they first arrived in King's Landing, the Northman could not find any fault with their etiquette. At the same time, he raised his head and looked at Irian, who was playing with her child not far away, with a rare tenderness on his serious face. When he was 16, he followed Melerio, who was about to marry Doran, to Dorne and became a guard beside Prince Doran. Therefore, Arya watched all the children of Doran and Melerio grow up, especially Irian, who was the eldest daughter of the two. Arya Hota had a fatherly love for Princess Irian. Now that she can marry the most powerful man in the world and is living a happy life, Arya Hota is relieved. Chapter 718 Red Dragon. Everyone in the world is the same. The vast majority of Dornish people also love peace. Only a small number of people do not know how to settle down. But they are not the people of Dorne, the Fowler family of Skyreach, the other family of Hellgate, and the Codgel family of Sandston. They don't understand the suffering of the people. Fortunately, your Majesty helped me eradicate these scum. With the umbrella over his head to block the glaring sunlight, Prince Doran sat in a wheelchair and watched his daughter and granddaughter spending the night on the grass. Then he turned around and spoke. I don't want to drag my people into such a hell on earth. Otherwise, when the news of Elia and his children's death came, I would not have chosen to endure it. But my determination to avenge her has never changed. I'm committed to the demise of Tywin Lannister and the Baratheon family. Prince Doran was telling the truth. He didn't want Dorne to fall into the flames of war and fight a war that was doomed to fail. Otherwise, he would not have insisted on negotiating with Jon Arryn, the envoy of the Iron Throne, despite the opposition of Oberyn and others. However, his actions to destroy the Baratheon dynasty have been ongoing, such as investing in Viserys, who was still a child, and marrying his eldest daughter to him. Prince Doran's words were to remind Viserys not to forget the kindness he had shown him. The silver-haired young man sitting under the umbrella was silent for a moment, then nodded, but changed the subject. I heard that you encountered some troubles at the port of King's Landing. Prince Doran lowered his eyes, but there was no angry expression, just nodded silently. They attacked the prince. Your Majesty. The North is standing behind Prince Doran spoke angrily. They came all the way from Sunspear to Dawn. Although the reason for coming here was a bit shameful, Area Hota knew that the prince was very happy when he boarded the ship because he had long talked about going to King's Landing to visit his daughter and granddaughter. Area Hota spoke, and the white-robed female knight standing behind Viserys glanced at him. She had seen such bearded monks when she was a mercenary in Valanciunas, and they were really good at using giant axes. I will let the Ministry of Internal Affairs investigate thoroughly. Viserys was not angry, but just nodded and spoke. This incident was indeed an accident. After all, Viserys was not an omniscient god, and he did not expect such a thing to happen in advance. However, it is possible that this was not an accident, but someone deliberately planned to provoke Prince Doran. Imagine if Prince Doran was attacked as soon as he arrived in King's Landing. Regardless of whether it was Prince Doran who ordered it, or Prince Quentin who killed people in the street, this incident was spread and promoted by people with ulterior motives, and it is very likely to become an unmanageable situation. But now there is no thorough investigation, and naturally we don't know whether there is anyone behind this matter. However, Prince Doran was able to remain calm in that situation, and stopped his son, and chose the most correct option. It is really admirable that the old man is still the best. Is Egan still a monk now? Prince Doran heard about the turmoil in King's Landing, and Egan's collusion with the believers in Sunspear City. Viserys did not condone or tolerate it at that time, but killed the fanatical believers in a bloody river, and King's Landing has been much quieter since then. He had wanted to ask directly about Egan's identity, because he had mentioned in his correspondence with his brother Oberyn that Egan did have some of the characteristics of Rhaegar and Elia. But things like appearance are too subjective, not to mention that there is no technology for testing now. It is still difficult for a baby in swaddling clothes to make people believe it just by words. However, Viserys still accepted this nephew, and later because of his firm belief in the seven gods and his love for religious work, Viserys even found the Archbishop of the Church of the Seven Gods to personally accept him as a disciple and teach him the truth of the seven gods doctrine. Now Egan has been a monk for many years, and the outside world has gradually lost his voice. Viserys nodded slightly, and at this time, a low roar of a giant dragon suddenly came from the sky above everyone's head. Prince Doran and his captain of the guards under the umbrella quickly raised their heads and looked at the sky. A giant dragon covered with red scales flapped its wings and roared, then fell from the sky. Is this a dragon? The thin gray-haired middle-aged man's calmness disappeared. He supported his wheelchair with his hands and seemed to want to stand up. Then Area Hota hurriedly supported him. Prince Doran's eyes were also full of shock and amazement. This red dragon has a graceful body, but at the same time it has a very violent aesthetic element. Now with a tail of more than 10 meters long, it is a behemoth in front of many creatures, including humans. The red dragon circled in the sky, roared, and then fell from the sky to Irian, Sansa, and Iana who were running around on the grass. Irian looked calm, but Sansa was a little nervous, and kept holding the hem of her skirt. However, it was not the first time she saw a dragon, so she didn't take it too seriously. The silver-haired little girl playing on the lawn ran over without fear and hugged the lowered head of the red female dragon. This is too dangerous, Your Majesty. Area Hota supported Prince Doran with his face full of nervousness. His heart was almost in his throat. As a loyal servant of the Martell family, he always treated Irian as his own daughter. How could he not be nervous when he saw Irian, Sansa and the little princess staying next to a dragon? But Prince Doran, who was supported by him to stand up from the wheelchair, was much calmer than him, even though his daughter and granddaughter were there. It is rumored that the black dragon Balerion, Your Majesty's mount, is more than 50 meters long. Is it regal? Prince Doran had been in the water garden for many years, and this was his first time seeing a dragon. The guards in the Red Castle and the people of King's Landing were now somewhat accustomed to it. They were used to a dragon flying through the sky and roaring. These dragons live in the vast royal forest not far from King's Landing. There is a comfortable environment suitable for dragons to live in. They can hunt for food by themselves. If they want to eat seafood, they can fly to the sea to catch it themselves. Therefore, these dragons living in the royal forest have never disturbed the lives of humans. No, she is not regal, father. She is Vaga, the partner chosen by Diana herself. Chapter 719 Supreme Priest. Dragons choose dragon riders, and dragon riders actually choose dragons. On the second name day of Viserys' daughter Diana, he carried Diana to the King's Wood and asked her to personally choose a more suitable dragon. After several years of growth, the dragons are now more than 10 meters in size, especially the eldest sister of several dragons, Vaga. Although she is a female dragon, her size and ferocity are still ahead of her brothers and sisters. When Viserys brought Diana to choose dragons, these dragons were also choosing her. Diana has half Dornish blood, but because Viserys' bloodline is now extremely pure, the little princess's dragon bloodline is also good. She attracted the attention of the crystal dragon of little Lady Syrinx, as well as the eldest sister of the dragon, Vaga. The crystal dragon has a beautiful figure and curves, a light green body, and dragon horns, a row of pointed bones on the neck, and wing bones are as transparent as crystal, reflecting colorful light. After growing up, Syrinx is more elegant, beautiful, and eye-catching than when she was little. When flying in the sun, her whole body is as bright as crystal. Every time she flies over King's Landing, she will attract cheers and amazement from the people. She likes this feeling of being the center of attention, so she passes by King's Landing more often than other brothers and sisters. The little lady seems to like this little girl with silver hair. She rarely puts down her pride and takes the initiative to spread her wings to attract her attention. However, she didn't expect that Diana's attention would be taken away by her eldest sister Vaga. The huge red dragon let out a low roar that made the whole royal forest tremble. Although she is a female dragon, her body is extremely strong. Her sharp and ferocious claws grab the ground, and her eyes have the aura of a hegemon. When she roared, the other brothers and sisters couldn't help but retreat, including Terex, who looked proud and had golden scales. Regal and Viserion, who were basking in the sun not far away, couldn't help but look up and take a look. As for Balerion, he was sleeping soundly. His body was so big that he looked like a mountain to these young dragons. Dragons are actually social animals. Now for this tribe, Balerion is a real dragon king and patriarch. He protects the cubs of the entire tribe from external harm by himself. The little princess Diana Targaryen finally chose Vaga. Just like the first week of the year, she grabbed Viserys' sword Dusk. This choice is completely in line with Diana's own heart. She was not attracted by the sparkling crystal dragon little Lady Syrinx, who could attract the hearts of girls, but chose the young dragon sister Vaga who could attract her attention more. Diana's choice of the elder sister seemed to hurt Syrinx's self-esteem. She was a little depressed for a while, but Viserys did not enlighten her. With Syrinx's optimistic personality, it is estimated that she will be able to get out soon. Then, as expected, within a few days, the little lady became active again. Vaga is my gift to Diana. Viserys looked at his daughter holding her dragon, and turned around and said, "They will grow together." Diana was still young, but the young dragon was only 1 year older than her. Although the body of the Red Queen grew very fast, the brains of human children also grew very fast. They did not have the huge bodies of dragons, but they had smarter brains than dragons of the same age. Viserys met Prince Doran in King's Landing, while on the other side, the Imperial fleet that sailed to Volantis stayed here for a few days, and was received by the Archon of Volantis. Volantis is a two-party ruling system, the Elephant Party and the Tiger Party. There are currently 3 Archons, 2 from the Elephant Party, and 1 from the Tiger Party. Since the Bloody Century, the people's resentment against the Tiger Party has reached its peak. So until now Volantis has been maintaining this political structure, where the Elephant Party has the upper hand. A lean camel is bigger than a horse. Although Volantis is now desolate, and no longer the city of flowers and fountains, the arrival of the Imperial fleet, like the previous visit, inevitably had a great impact on the already unstable political situation in Volantis. Although the 2,000 naval soldiers of the Imperial fleet are not enough to determine the outcome of the powerful mistress of the Summer Sea, he represents a huge empire with 8 dragons, and can easily gather more than 100,000 troops. None of the 3 Archons of Volantis dare to underestimate him. Therefore, when the Imperial fleet sailed into the port of Volantis, it attracted the attention of all parties. Asha Greyjoy even became the busiest person in Volantis. Now she is visiting the Temple of R'hllor in Volantis. The person who invited her is Binero, the supreme priest of the Red God. Although the belief system of the Red God is loose and does not have a strong binding force on monks and priests everywhere, in theory, the supreme priest is the first person in the ruler belief system in the mortal world. Benelo's words were as powerful as gold, and he could call on countless Red God believers to become his fans. Melisande, who had known Viserys in her early years and was now the deputy dean of the seminary in King's Landing, still had to perform the disciple ceremony in front of Benelo. The identities of the two were completely different in the religious system. This was equivalent to the difference between the Archbishop of the Church of the Seven Gods and an ordinary monk who preached in foreign countries, because there was no such position as Archbishop in the Red God Church. Welcome, the messenger of the Son of the Sunday. Benelo was tall and thin, with prominent facial features and skin as white as milk. His cheeks, chin and bald head were covered with flame tattoos. The flames wrapped around his lipless mouth. His high voice startled Asher Greyjoy, who saw him for the first time. The other party's address was a bit strange, but Asher understood some of it, and understood why the other party said so. It turned out that there was a rumor that had been circulating among the Red God's believers that didn't know where it started. Perhaps when the Red Comet hit him, the believers claimed that Viserys was the son of R'hllor and a hero destined to save the world. R'hllor is the Lord of Light, so the followers of the Red God generally call Viserys the son of the sun or the son of God, rather than the king of the Seven Kingdoms or the current title Emperor of the Valyrian Empire. Chapter 720 Darkness and Destruction. Your Majesty will encounter some troubles in the future. The eyes of darkness have already set their sights on him. The servants of the night intend to overthrow him, and the will of destruction is about to come to him. Benero was wearing a red robe, and his eyes were piercing as he looked at Asher Greyjoy. There seemed to be a flame deep in his eyes. However, his gaze also made Asher feel a little uncomfortable. She felt like a ball of air, without any clothes, and had been seen through. What darkness? What destruction? What are you talking about? Why don't you speak more clearly? And Asher couldn't understand what the supreme priest, who had great power in the city of Volantis, was saying in the clouds. But Asher didn't dare to get angry at him, because Benero had a great influence among the Red God's followers. Even the Archons of Volantis were very afraid of Benero. He was definitely the invisible overlord of this city. Because Volantis is the headquarters of the Red God Church, and the slaves who suffer at the bottom of the city generally believe in the Red God Church. There are 4 slaves in every 5 people in Volantis. Volantis is divided into 2 urban areas by the Rhone River. The eastern city is inhabited by nobles of ancient blood, and the western area is inhabited by mercenaries, foreigners, slaves, and civilians. Maya once lived in the lower city of Volantis, and was a low-class citizen. The upper and lower urban areas are connected by a long bridge. The rich people living east of the long bridge are most afraid of slave uprisings, but every night thousands of people listen to Benero's speech. Even the Archons are powerless to stop them, because there are many believers of the Lord of Light in the Tiger Robe army, and the Archons cannot even order them to attack the Red Monks. Therefore, this supreme priest has a transcendent status in the city of Volantis, and no one dares to offend him. He can almost be called the 4th Archon. Asher met the 3 Archons of Volantis a few days ago, but only Benero made her feel creepy. Not only because he spoke in a mysterious way, but also because his eyes seemed to be able to see through all the truth, which made Asher feel naked and even wanted to turn around and run away. But due to the strong influence of the other party in the city, she still patiently listened to what the other party said. I saw the truth in the flames. However, Benero did not answer Asher's question directly. The two walked and talked in this magnificent temple of R'hllor. This temple of R'hllor was built extremely magnificently. Its columns, stairs, buttresses, stone arches, domes, and towers were all very huge, and everything was integrated, as if they were carved from the same rock. And from a distance, it looked a bit like the towering Egan High Hill. Red, yellow, gold, orange. These colors intertwined and interpenetrated on the walls of the temple, like clouds at dusk. Flames don't deceive. This is different from worshipping false gods in a temple of lies. The two walked and talked in the long corridor. On both sides were holy fire hands wearing gorgeous armor, orange cloaks and holding flaming spears. They were the guardians of the entire temple. Bonero's words seemed to have a meaning, because in Westeros, the Red God's followers would often use this to attack the Seven Gods, believing that they were worshipping a non-existent god, and worshipping false gods in a temple of lies. Fortunately, Asha did not believe in the Seven Gods, and even her belief in the drowned god was not necessarily so firm. She only worshipped temporarily, when she needed it. Darkness and destruction. Then Bonero's steps paused slightly, and Asha stopped without knowing why. Then she saw the tall and thin man in front of her, with pale skin and flame tattoos on his chin and bald head, raised his hand, and pointed to the distance. There was the end of the road to the Temple of Valor. On a solitary towering red wall, 2 Valyrian runes were vaguely engraved, that Asha could not understand. It seemed that many years had passed. There was also a shabby futon under this solitary red wall. When Asha saw these 2 complicated runes, her mind went blank in an instant, as if she had fallen into some kind of psychedelic state. Fortunately, Asha's will was still firm. In the end, she shook her head suddenly, and broke free from this psychedelic state. Her eyes were full of disbelief, and she was breathing heavily. What is this? Asha looked up at Bonero in shock, and asked in confusion. Although she knew that these were ancient runes from Valyria, she did not recognize them. At the same time, she did not know what happened to her just now. Suddenly, her mind went blank, as if she had taken a love potion. Could it be the reason for these 2 Valyrian runes? They mean darkness and destruction. Bonero turned his head slightly, and looked at Asha in surprise, because ordinary people would not break free so quickly when they saw it for the first time, and then he began to explain. This temple was built along with the city of Volantis. At first, it was a square, and then this temple appeared so abruptly, and these 2 runes appeared along with the temple, and no one knows who left them behind. Bonero was not joking, because Volantis is the oldest free trade city-state and the first colony of the Valyrian Free Fortress. At first, it was just a military outpost. However, according to the records at that time, there was no red temple at all, and it was just a square. In all the documents describing Volantis in the past, no one mentioned it. No one knew when it was built or who built it. Moreover, such a magnificent building was 3 times larger than the great cathedral of St. Bela. It could not be built in 1 or 2 years, but there was no record of it in the long river of history. Because the people at that time had long died, it was impossible to find someone to verify it. In later generations, it just stood quietly on the east side of the Long Bridge. Darkness and destruction. The truth is hidden in 2 different places. The man with fire runes all over his bald head sighed. When things here are over, I will send my messenger Makoro to King's Landing to meet his majesty, and tell him these truths, not that woman from Ashe. As for you. Bonero paused slightly in the middle of his words, and there seemed to be flames burning deep in his eyes. He then turned around, and looked Asha Greyjoy up and down, which made her shudder again, and gave her goosebumps. You have the remnant of the evil god's aura on you. You are being targeted. Chapter 721, Deep Diver. Bonero's voice fell, in another corner of Volantis. This place is located west of the Rhone River. It is a place where mercenaries, foreigners, slaves, and civilians live. The roads here are dilapidated, the houses are old, and there are all kinds of people on the streets. And it is in this place, which is completely opposite to the upper city, as if it is not in the same city, that there is an ordinary and dilapidated 2-story street-facing building. This small building is dark black, and there are some mottled marks on the wall, exposing the things inside the wall. The door is closed all year round. The neighbors around have rarely seen the owner of this place come out. Even the windows are covered tightly, and no light can be seen. People rumor that the owner here was an exiled noble from the other side of the narrow sea, but he never came back, after going to sea many years ago, and he might have died. However, some people believed what these people said. They were probably some drunkards who couldn't find a place to sleep, and some thieves who were a little tight on money, and guessed that there might be gold and silver hidden in the mansion of the wandering noble. But since they entered this gloomy and dark building, they never came out again. People gradually discovered this, and spread rumors that this place had become a haunted house, so they avoided it, and were unwilling to get close. However, all the dead people were insignificant social remnants, so they did not attract much attention from the authorities. Except for the people living nearby, this place has become a restricted area for strangers over time. However, now, in this black hut that is regarded as a restricted area, a figure is slowly shaking. He's back. He came to see me. The figure trembled and seemed to be talking to himself, and seemed to be talking to another invisible person hidden in his heart. The voice was hoarse, like the sound of blades rubbing against each other, which made people shudder. No, he didn't come to see me, it was someone else. Asha Greyjoy, a woman from the Greyjoy family, she is his subordinate. The voice that was talking to himself recognized the Greyjoy family. His fuzzy brain still had these names, but he had no impression of Asha. This was not because of his poor memory, but because Asha was only a few years old when he left Westeros, and the heir of the Greyjoy family was not this girl. He only heard of Roderick and Meryn after the Iron Fleet's visit. Then the figure in the room was silent for a long time and seemed to have finally calmed down. His mind became much clearer and he regained his normal thinking. Then he spoke to himself again, and this time his voice was surprisingly calm. She is not dead. Since he escaped, he has been hiding in Volantis in fear, fearing that death will come to him again. He is afraid of that person, or more accurately, afraid of the familiar smell on him. He is so familiar with that smell that it has become the source of countless nightmares for him. Crazy monsters, humanoid creatures with fins on their backs, the screams of his companions, the torn bodies, the blood that was spilt, all these scenes made it difficult for him to fall asleep. Although he was hiding in Volantis, he seldom went out. Every time he went out, it was in the middle of the night, and he had to wrap himself up tightly, for fear that others would see his current appearance, and more importantly, he was afraid of seeing himself. Therefore, the doors and windows of this small house were closed, and even completely covered with paper, so that no light could be seen, and there was no mirror in the room. She is not dead. I have been so well prepared. At this moment, his voice was low and hoarse, and his palm stroked the scales on his cheeks, that were clearly tactile. The 5 fingers that were once free to move, had been connected together to form webbed feet. There was also a fin on his back, just like the monster he saw at the beginning. He could breathe freely underwater and swim hundreds of miles in a day. Now, just standing there for a while, there was already a pool of water under his feet. After so many years, he had unknowingly become a monster he saw at the beginning, but his heart still could not accept this result. At this moment, a flash of lightning suddenly flashed outside the window, followed by rolling thunder. The lightning illuminated his hideous face, that was no longer in human form, and a heavy rain came quietly and poured down. The last time he heard about the visit of the Imperial fleet, he felt a long-lost fear in his heart, and that familiar feeling seemed to come again. He was afraid that Viserys would find him, and he was even in a state of panic. Therefore, he decided to strike first. He took out some money and disguised himself as a mysterious person to hire a mercenary group to assassinate Asha Greyjoy, so that the Iron Throne's fleet would stop in Tyrosh and not continue to move east. However, this assassination attempt failed. Asha Greyjoy was rescued and survived. He stood not far away and saw this scene with his own eyes. He felt that this was as if it was God's will, so he was frightened and fled back to Volantis again. As for what happened later, he had no idea. All the captives were poisoned to death by the strangler in the prison of Tyrosh. The bribed jailer claimed that a Volantis with a flame tattoo on his face had handed the poison to him. These had nothing to do with him. It was purely another person who took advantage of the opportunity to frame him and wanted to stir up trouble in the trading city. However, he didn't care that someone framed him, because now he was not even a human being, so how could he care about these things? But Asha's arrival still reminded him of the bad memories in the past, and bits and pieces gradually emerged. He had killed the poor Meester, and then disguised himself as him to sneak into Viserys' side. As an insider of the Iron Throne, he provided a lot of information about the Targaryen family, but it was accidentally exposed a few years later. Viserys gave him a cup of poisoned wine to send him off because of their past friendship. At that time, he was also heartbroken. He took the cup and drank it all and then bled to death. However, he did not expect that when he opened his eyes again, he did not go to heaven or the 7th level of hell, but was in a dark tomb. There seemed to be something hidden in his body, either a curse or a virus, which did not allow him to die like this, and the existence of the poisoned wine just happened to stimulate the other party, allowing him to come back to life. Then he dug up his own grave and escaped. He made some disguises at the scene, making it look like it was dug up by others, not from the inside. Then he ran away. Chapter 2. Wait a minute. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 722. Gillian Lannister. Gillian Lannister, the youngest brother of Tywin Lannister. He once sailed from Lannisport to Volantis in the Laughing Lion, ready to explore the ruins of Valyria and find the Valyrian steel sword light whistle, which was passed down from generation to generation. He never returned after that, and has not returned for more than 10 years. People thought he was dead, but in fact Gillian was still alive, and became the longest lived among Tywin's brothers. Tywin was beheaded in King's Landing after his defeat. Kevin was killed when he was chasing the second prince of the Targaryen family more than 10 years ago. Tyja died earlier, dying of smallpox in 285 of the Egan calendar. Gillian has been struggling to survive. He did not die in the ruins of Valyria, but escaped from the monster by chance. However, although he escaped successfully, he seemed to be cursed by the mysterious soil until he drank poisoned wine and died. Then the power of the curse took effect and resurrected him again, but he became a half a man, half fish monster. If he could meet Benjen Stark, the two might have some common topics. But compared to Benjen, who was trapped on the ice field, Gillian didn't seem to be much better. Benjen lost his life, and only his soul was left in this dead body, while Gillian was resurrected. His body still had temperature, and he still needed to eat flesh and blood. He would bleed after being injured, but he became a complete monster. Even Gillian himself couldn't accept his changes, and became passive and evasive. I can't escape anymore. Then the deep dark room was silent for a while, and Gillian's soliloquy was heard again. His voice at this moment had become completely calm. He had been uneasy since he dug up his grave and escaped. Gillian always felt as if someone was watching him in the dark, and it seemed to be getting closer and closer, so he hid himself completely. Gillian felt that the person who was looking for him was Viserys, because only on him could he smell the familiar smell. Although Gillian lived in seclusion, he was also very concerned about the situation in Westeros. He knew that the silver-haired boy had conquered the 7 kingdoms and sat on the Iron Throne by riding a dragon, relying on Andalus and Pentos as a springboard. The Lannister family had also been destroyed by him. Now the black-hearted Toyne family of the former Stormlands occupied Casterly Rock. Their family motto was fly high and far away, and his brother Tywin was also beheaded in King's Landing. If Gillian knew about this in the past, he would definitely be furious and vowed to avenge his family. However, now these things can't even arouse his anger. No one can understand his feelings now, but he seems to have been completely immersed in a kind of panic. This feeling of danger approaching step by step almost overwhelmed his nerves, making him feel that everyone around him would be someone who wanted to frame him. Therefore, everyone who strayed here would disappear, and even their bodies could not be found, because they had all become his food, and were eaten alive by him. Now Gillian believes that the Iron Throne sent a fleet to visit just to find his trace, but in fact, Viserys didn't know he was still alive. When his grave was dug up, Viserys thought that the Lannisters had stolen his body and buried it, but Gillian didn't know this. His fragile and sensitive nerves were stimulated, so he thought he had to take the initiative. I will kill her myself. Gillian Lannister finally made up his mind. Asha returned to her residence in Volantis. However, she recalled the supreme priest of the Red God cult she met during the day, and the words that the other party said that made people uncomfortable. Especially what Bonero told her at the end. The other party claimed that he smelled the breath of the evil god from Asha, and it seemed that someone was eyeing her and was about to take action. It is hard not to associate this sentence with a threat, and then think of what happened in Tyrosh not long ago, that thrilling assassination, and the murderer has not been found until now. Asha frowned slightly and sat on the bed and couldn't help feeling a little uneasy, then turned her head and looked out the window. Outside the window is a night view of the city of Volantis, where the lights are bright, the crowds are bustling, there are ancient buildings and statues, fountains, and flowers everywhere. Every corner of the city of Volantis is full of historical charm. Although it is no longer as prosperous as it was in its heyday, and has become a little lonely, it still has more heritage than the newly built young city of King's Landing. The Empire's fleet docked at the port of Volantis for supplies. This is the last trading city-state before going to Nars Island. The fleet must replenish enough goods here. Otherwise, the next voyage will go deep into the wilderness for the Westeros people who are not good at venturing out. At that time, they may face many unexpected situations such as insufficient supplies. What are the people on Nars Island in the Summer Islands like? The woman with short black hair thought about these messy things, then leaned the pillow against the head of the bed, took off the dagger at her waist, and hid it under the pillow, and then lay on the bed to fall asleep. This was her habit before going to bed. Ever since the night when the Iron Islands fell into the Sea of Dead, Asha had never had a peaceful sleep. In a sense, she and Gillian were in the same predicament, paranoia of being persecuted. Every time Asha fell asleep, she could dream of those savage whites pouncing on her. She was afraid that, if she closed her eyes, someone would bite her throat off. Not long after that, the woman with short black hair fell into a deep sleep. As time passed, the lights outside the window gradually became scarce, until most of the city was plunged into darkness. As the night deepened, only the patrolling tiger-cloaked army was still active in the city of Volantis. At this time, a slave soldier with tiger stripes on his cheek saw a figure flashing quickly on the corner of the street, and his brows immediately frowned. Who is it? Ever since the Empire's fleet arrived at the port of Volantis, the governor of Volantis has introduced a temporary measure to impose a curfew on the entire city after 12 PM, which will be lifted at dawn the next day, to prevent any accidents when foreign troops stay. Now that it is past 12 PM, no one is allowed to go out according to the law. But he saw clearly that it should be a figure who seemed to be wearing a loose black robe, so the tiger-robed soldier frowned slightly, looked at his companion beside him, clenched the spear in his hand, and chased after him. Not long after, a shrill scream suddenly sounded in the alley, and Asha, who was sleeping, was also awakened by the scream. Chapter 723 Monster Attack. The shrill scream spread far away in Volantis, which was shrouded in the night. Asha was awakened from her sleep and instantly grabbed the dagger hidden under her pillow. What's the noise? The woman with short black hair didn't know what happened. In the dark, she sat up without lighting the candle by the window and clenched the dagger in her hand. Outside, there was a commotion, and it seemed that something unexpected had happened. Then there were shouts of guards and dense footsteps. Stop. Don't run. Catch him. Asha's temporary residence in Volantis was the famous merchant's house. It was the largest and best tavern in Volantis. It was located in the upper city east of the Long Bridge, on the Fishmonger's Square. It was a 4-story behemoth, overlooking the surrounding warehouses, taverns, and brothels. Its hall was larger than the halls of most castles in Westeros. The courtyard in the middle was paved with stone slabs and planted with many grape trellises. The surrounding pavilions and caves made the hall look like a maze. However, at this moment, a black figure with blood on his body suddenly appeared outside Asha Greyjoy's window. His blood-red eyes were wide open, and he was breathing heavily, as if he was looking for something in the house. Then he saw the situation in the house clearly, or more accurately, the people in the house, and then he suddenly let out a howl, and tore the window apart and rushed in. What is this? Asha, who was sitting in the house and was awakened from her sleep, had no time to react before the disaster struck. She was sitting on the bed and had not yet come to her senses when she saw a figure suddenly crawling outside the window. She was startled, but in the backlight, she did not see the other person's appearance clearly and only had a quick glance. She saw the strange head covered with fish scales, a pair of scalloped eyes, a bloody mouth and sharp teeth, as if it had just eaten a person. Fuck. However, seeing the other party suddenly pounce on her, Asha suddenly shuddered and even swore, and reacted instantly, then rolled on the spot to avoid the opponent's first attack. This monster covered with fish scales moved very fast, and had considerable strength. It easily tore the window apart and then rushed in and smashed a table. Fortunately, Asha Greyjoy was a battle-hardened female pirate after all. She led the Iron Races to fight guerrilla warfare with the Legion of the Dead. After escaping to Westeros, she also gained a foothold in the mountains of the west and made the nobles of the Westerland unable to encircle and suppress her several times. What kind of monster is this? However, Asha, who dodged the opponent's first attack, was shocked and angry. She had never seen such a monster before. This was definitely not a human being, but a complete monster. The frightened black short-haired woman then thought of the warning Bonero had given her during the day. You have the residual breath of the evil god on you, and you are being targeted. Is this the monster that is targeting you? Asha's body trembled slightly, and then she saw the other party rushing towards her again, and she turned around and ran away without any hesitation. She suddenly opened the door and ran out, closing the door, as if she wanted to use the door panel to stop the other party's progress, but it was easily smashed by the monster. Damn it, Asha gritted her teeth slightly and clenched the dagger in her hand. The other party was faster than her. If she wanted to escape, she would definitely not be able to escape the other party's pursuit. But what Asha couldn't figure out was why such a monster would target her. When did she provoke the other party? Was it because she was fishing at sea and killed its kind? What's going on? What happened? However, such a big commotion had already alarmed other guests living in the merchant's house. After all, this was the largest in Volantis city, and countless people lived there. The chaos outside naturally woke them up. But this monster was not targeting anyone else. It just stared at Asha, then let out a low roar, and pounced on her again. This time, Asha was blocked at the end of the corridor, and did not continue to run away. She clenched the dagger in her hand, dodged the opponent's attack, and then fought back. However, Asha underestimated the opponent's speed. Instead of dodging, she was hit hard on the shoulder and flew out. But the battle-hardened female pirate was not a vegetarian after all. When she was knocked away by the monster, the dagger in her hand also stabbed into the opponent's thigh. Roar! The monster roared angrily in pain, and its blood-red eyes seemed to be aroused by all its ferocity, completely losing its reason. He just wanted to tear the woman in front of him to pieces, so that Viserys would not stop looking at her, but his brain was now dull and gradually approached the deep diver he had seen before, completely irrational and only knowing bloodthirsty monsters. Little did he know that, if the messenger of the Iron Throne died here, Viserys' eyes would definitely be cast here, and it would be even more difficult for Gillian to escape in the end. However, at this moment, Asha was knocked out and broke a door panel directly and flew into another room. After being injured, Gillian roared and wanted to pounce on the woman and bite off her throat. But at this time, a huge axe suddenly chopped down and stopped Gillian from getting closer to Asha. Stop. Asha's uncle Victarion followed his niece into the city of Volantis, and at this time he stood up to stop the monster. What on earth is this? Victarion's face was solemn, and he clenched the huge axe in his hand, looking at the monster in front of him. Damn human. However, Gillian was furious, and an obscure and harsh sound came out of his throat. He thought Asha was ordered by Viserys to find him, so he wanted to bite Asha to death and then escape, but he didn't expect to be hindered by others again and again. But as soon as he spoke, Victarion and Asha, who had fallen to the ground and had not yet gotten up, changed their expressions. They had originally thought that this was some kind of monster they had never seen before, and it had accidentally sneaked into the city and attacked everywhere, but they did not expect that the other party could speak human language, which completely changed the nature of the matter. Then Gillian rushed towards Victarion, and he decided to tear them apart like the poor slave soldiers before, and then kill the woman assigned by Viserys. Chapter 724 Escape. Roar. Gillian roared. His movements were extremely fast and powerful. However, the former captain of the invincible Ironborn was not to be trifled with. He held the axe tightly in both hands and fought with the other party. Gillian was now eroded by the evil force that penetrated deep into his bones, and his whole body had undergone tremendous changes. But because he tried his best to restrain himself, he still did not completely sink into a monster after so many years, and still retained a little bit of consciousness. But because of this, his evolution was not complete, and he could not fully exert the full power of this monster. If it was the monster Gillian saw in the ruins of Illyria, it might be easy to kill everyone in front of him. Even the bravest warriors of mankind could not fight this monster alone. Uncle, be careful. At this time, Asha also struggled to get up from the ground. She was hit hard by the other party just now, and a piece of the door panel was broken. It felt like her bones were about to fall apart. But at this moment, Victorian, who was facing the monster head on to protect his niece, finally found the opponent's flaw and seized the opportunity. Gillian was not good at fighting, but acted on instinct. Go to hell, beast. After all, Victorian had rich combat experience and a strong body. He raised his axe and chopped the opponent's chest, trying to split the opponent in half. But Victorian underestimated the opponent's defense. The fish scales seemed to be wearing armor. The axe chopped the monster's chest, and Gillian immediately let out a sharp roar. Blood flowed down in an instant. It was chopped to pieces, and even some bones were exposed. This was almost a fatal injury, but instead of retreating, he rushed over as if he was enraged. Victorian had not expected that the other party would be able to fight back. Although he reacted quickly, he was still bitten on the arm by the other party, almost breaking his arm, but tearing off a piece of flesh. In an instant, his body was covered with blood. The muscles on Victorian's cheek twitched suddenly, and a painful groan came out of his throat, and the axe in his hand was thrown into the corridor. Just as Gillian was about to rush over and bite off Victorian's throat, he was stopped by more people who gathered around and saved Victorian. What kind of monster is this? Quick, stop him. This sudden battle attracted more and more onlookers. After all, there were so many guests living in the merchant's house, and there were also tiger-robe soldiers patrolling near the upper city. It was impossible for them to give up after several colleagues were suddenly killed by the other party, so they all chased after them. Kill him. Let's kill him together. Then a brown-haired mercenary stood up with a long sword in his hand and spoke first. There is strength in numbers. If only a few people saw such a monster, they might not dare to rush up, but now many mercenaries, guards, and soldiers of the Tiger Robe army gathered around the battlefield. They all clenched their weapons and surrounded it, wanting to kill the monster together. Although Gillian was angry and let out a low roar of suffocation and pain, he still retained the last bit of reason. The wound on his chest was still bleeding. Now there were more and more humans surrounding him. It was impossible for him to kill the woman assigned by Viserys, and he might even die here. Then the monster roared and rushed towards the weakest place, and the mercenary there was not able to react in time and his throat was bitten off. Gillian got on all fours and jumped out of the window like the monster he saw that year, leaving a long blood mark, and then disappeared into the darkness in 3 jumps. The battle took place in a short time, just less than a few minutes, but the process of the battle was extremely thrilling. Including the 3 Tiger Robe soldiers who died outside, the monster killed a total of 5 people in a short period of time. In the end, the captain of the former invincible Ironborn hit the opponent with an axe, which stopped it from continuing to kill. But unfortunately, the monster, which should have been seriously injured, or even waiting to die, still jumped out of the window and escaped. On the other side, Victorian, who had a piece of flesh bitten off his arm, almost fainted due to excessive blood loss. Quick, someone come and save him. Fortunately, this is the largest inn in Volantis. There are no meesters on the SS continent, but there are doctors. An old man with grey hair and proficiency in pharmacology was invited over. He first sprinkled some powder on the wound to stop the bleeding on the arm of the Iron Tower like strong man, and then put some mashed herbs on it, and finally wrapped it with a clean soft cloth. The doctor from Volantis bandaged Victorian, otherwise he might die if the bleeding continued. This is a monster that has appeared in legends. The next morning, after her uncle Victorian had passed the critical period, Asha once again visited Bonero, the supreme priest of the Red God. This time she couldn't blame the Archon of Volantis, because this time it was not someone who wanted to assassinate her, but a complete monster. And the mysterious supreme priest had reminded her yesterday, but Asha didn't understand it very well at that time, so she didn't take it to heart. But after this incident, Asha couldn't help but take it to heart, so she rushed over to ask for advice. After listening to the monster described by Asha, Bonero narrowed his eyes slightly and spoke. One of your Westeros meesters is called Silent Pike. He once wrote a book about a monster similar to what you described. After the monster escaped yesterday, the pursuers followed the blood trail, but found that the monster eventually disappeared into the River Rhine. It seemed to jump into the water to escape, but considering that the monster was covered with fish scales and had a fin on its back, perhaps the underwater area was where the monster was active. The name of this book is Strange Stone. Mr. Sillen believes that there is a humanoid monster that lives underwater. He describes it as a strange, deformed race, a half-human, half-beast born from creatures on the salt sea and human women. Bonero said hoarsely, "It is hard to imagine that a top-level charlatan and the Red God cult is also familiar with various books." Chapter 725 Sea Monster Mystery. Mr. Sillen's real name is Sillen Pike. He is a bastard from the Iron Islands and lived about a century ago. He has a deep understanding of marine life and is one of the most professional scholars in the relevant field. He is committed to studying and finding evidence of the existence of some ancient sea monsters. The monster described by Asher appeared in his manuscript Strange Stone and was named Deep Diver by Mr. Sillen. Mr. Sillen found the remains of this monster and believed that they were the prototypes of the mermaid myth, and their ancestors, the marine creatures, were the prototypes of the worship of the drowned god. He also said that the ancient buildings on the Isle of War, the foundations of the Tower of the Sky and the Seaston Place were all built with a similar black stone, and the origins of these buildings were unknown, so he presumed that they were all the creations of the deep diver. However, his hypothesis was later overturned by another doctor in the Citadel. Dr. Corleone believed that, although the foundations of the Seaston Place and the Tower of the Sky were both built with black stone, they were not the same black stone. Because Seaston is a kind of oily black stone with some greasy surface, which seems to absorb all light, while the foundation of the towering tower is a dry black stone, and the touch and appearance of the surface are completely different from Seaston. And Seaston is a naturally formed strange stone. No one knows who created it. It is even said that before the ancestors landed on the Iron Islands, this black stone had been lying quietly on the beach of Old Wake Island. Mr. Koth speculated that it was brought and left by visitors from the Sunset Sea. The ancient buildings on the Isle of War clearly have traces of artificial carving, and are the same as the black stone buildings left by many Valyrian dragon kings in Dragonstone and the trading city-states. It is suspected that guests riding dragons visited Old Town many years ago, but according to current history and archaeology, it cannot be shown that Valyrians have ever come to such a distant place as Old Town. These are crucial evidence for the advancement of the existence of dragons, because the specific time of the traces of ancient buildings on the Isle of War can be traced back to before the ancestors came to Westeros, which also supplements the Valyrian origin theory. Because some scholars believe that they originated from the current Old Town in Westeros, they lived in peace with the children of the forest, and the history of the Valyrians is even older than the landing of the ancestors. Their priests predicted that a crisis sweeping the world would arise in Westeros in the future, that is, the coming of the Long Night, so the Valyrians fled their homeland. However, there is no conclusive evidence to confirm the origin of Valyria. Although Dr. Corleone overturned Mr. Sillen's hypothesis of the same origin of the Black Stone, he also confirmed the existence of the Deep Diver. He believes that the remains of ancient buildings on the Isle of War and the maze builders of Loras are the same kind of people, because they all turned the buildings into mazes. However, in the ancient legends of Loras, these maze builders were eventually destroyed by marine creatures, suspected to be half human, half fish deep divers or mermaids. At present, the academic community generally has no conclusion on whether the deep divers are mermaids or mermen, but some scholars hold this view. I was targeted by a mermaid? Asha Greyjoy was slightly stunned after hearing the explanation of the High Priest Bonero. She never believed in these ghost stories, but the one that attacked her yesterday was indeed a monster. When she thought of the other party's appearance, sharp fangs stained with blood and flesh, fish scales all over and smooth skin, and a pair of scalloped eyes, Asha shuddered slightly. It was difficult for her to associate this monster with the beautiful and gentle mermaid in the legend. The drowned people believed that the Grey King, the greatest king of the ancient Iron Islands, had married a mermaid and gave birth to 100 sons. When Asha heard this story as a child, she was curious and asked her fourth uncle Aaron, mermaids don't have that thing under their bodies. How did the Grey King marry a mermaid and give birth to 100 sons? Asha had peeped through the cracks in the door to watch adults in bed and even played with her brother Theon's little dick, so she matured earlier than anyone else. Aaron Greyjoy was defeated by his niece's innocent questions and never told her stories again. Now Asha thought of the story of the mermaid that Uncle Aaron had told her and thought of the monster she encountered last night, and she felt a deep chill. If the mermaid and the monster were really the same thing, then she really admired the Grey King, who was worthy of being a warrior who killed the sea dragon Naga and was indeed a werewolf. But it doesn't matter, Lord Messenger. Although the power of the evil god is terrible, it is destined to be unable to compete with the true god. The tall and thin supreme priest of the Red God cult, with prominent facial features, spoke in a faint voice. He had long sensed some kind of evil aura entangled in Asha, and suspected that something bad was targeting her. But Bonero did not expect the other party to attack so quickly, and in the prosperous upper city of Volantis. This city is the headquarters of the Red God cult. This monster really doesn't take him seriously. You are targeted by the servants of the evil god. You need to be blessed by the power of the true god, otherwise it will come to you sooner or later after it recovers from its injuries. By then, I'm afraid it won't be so easy for you to escape. Bonero was telling the truth. This monster is half human and half fish, so it is not friendly to attack on land, especially in a prosperous city like Volantis. And Asha will leave by boat sooner or later, but when she reaches the sea, she will come to the other party's territory. This monster may come to her at any time. At that time, there may not be a Victorian who can jump out to stop the other party. Although Victorian has passed the dangerous period, he still has a high fever and there is absolutely no way to recover for a while. Moreover, the opponent learns from his failures. Even the most mentally retarded animals know this truth, let alone such a monster. The next time it attacks, Asha may not be able to escape so easily. The black-haired woman's face was a little uncertain after hearing Bonero's words. She knew that the other party wanted her to convert to the faith of the Red God. Bonero was worthy of being the supreme priest of the Red God. He did not forget to preach at this time. But she was born as an Iron race and considered herself the true heir of the Iron Islands. Although she was not a drowned person and her belief in the drowned god might not be so firm, she could not betray the drowned god easily. Otherwise, even her subordinates would not be able to explain and might leave her. I can't betray the drowned god. Asha's face was uncertain. After thinking for a while, she finally shook her head and said, "End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video."